And with that, we'll bring in a man who has multiple degrees from MIT, including a PhD in biological engineering. He is also running for Senate in 2020. Welcome, Dr. Shiva. So nice to have you on the show today.
Great to be here, Christina. Hope you're well.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've all been held as a captive audience, right? Watching President Donald Trump handle the coronavirus outbreak, the situation. He has received both praise and criticism. What do you think? How has the president handled the outbreak?
Well, he's handled, as the best he could, given the fact that he's surrounded by sharks and people who are not really advising him well on the science side of it. What I'm talking about is Fauci. And that's what's unfortunate because, the president went through the Russian collusion nonsense that he had to go through. Then he had to go through the impeachment thing. And now he's having to deal with this coronavirus. And unfortunately, this guy Fauci has been in this environment for nearly 4 decades across multiple presidents. And he's essentially embedded into the scientific establishment, which has created an unfortunate lie about the immune system and an unfortunate lie about the solution to something like this called a coronavirus, or more importantly, infectious disease, without any real emphasis, which is a real issue, about the fact that it is a overactive, dysfunctional, weakened immune system that overreacts, and that's what causes damage to the body. And unfortunately, Fauci has not talked about that because the truth of that leads to a solution which has nothing to do with mandating vaccines and shutting down the country. And that's what's unfortunate.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you said solution. I'm going to get to that a little later in the discussion. But many people, you are talking about Dr. Fauci right now. Many people are questioning both Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx when it comes to these models that continue to change and their motives, which you kind of touched on a little bit. What is your take on these doctors that are advising the president and why they're advising him the way that they are?
Look, if you look, Christina, at the typical MD, many of them go into wanting to become a doctor out of some noble service. But fundamentally, the medical school education is really a big pharma medical education where the doctor is really trained, if this, then this. And the then is typically a pharmaceutical drug or some harsh medical intervention. Now, if you look at someone like a Fauci and Birx, they're sort of at the top of their quote unquote game, which means they're highly embedded into the big pharma model of medical education and the big pharma model of what the solution is. And that solution is typically a direct line from this disease, find typically a virus or a bug, and then recommend a vaccine or some harsh chemical solution. And most of that has to do with profiting the very, very big pharma companies. And so if you look at someone like Fauci, he's a guy who architected the big lie that HIV is responsible for AIDS. And it's a much deeper discussion, but he built his entire career on that, not talking about the fact it's the suppression of the immune system. When people's immune system gets suppressed, you can react to all sorts of exogenous things coming in. So this gentleman, and by the way, he prides himself on connections with Hollywood and Elton John and all this. And I think there's a group trying to make him the sexiest man alive on people. But you're talking about a guy who's embedded into the deep state. And he's your typical example of the worst of the modern scientific establishment.
Okay, well, let's take a look at this right now. H1N1, the swine flu, right? Back then, there was a completely different reaction to it. Dr. Fauci was in the administration at that time. President Barack Obama, he had a completely different reaction. Fauci had different recommendations that he's having now. Even the media coverage has been completely different from the swine flu now to the coronavirus. Why? Why do you see such a change?
Well, look, if you take a systems approach forces you to integrate multiple pieces. There's a political piece here, there's a health piece here, and there's the economic piece here. In the case of Barack Obama, there wasn't a quote unquote overreaction, right? We didn't shut down the country. We had people, the media essentially protected. Here's a gentleman, Obama I'm talking about, who did not allow the big banks to fail when they should have failed. He used quantitative easing to essentially bail them out. And since 2008 and 9, this country's been essentially on a crack model of running the economy, where we print money, and that's what the country has gotten used to. And because of Obama, we decidedly destroyed our economic base by outsourcing a tremendous amount of manufacturing to China. We destroyed our innovation base by allowing China to steal. So when Trump comes into office, he's dealing essentially with a catastrophic situation. And I think Trump knew that what was going on with the Fed and with quantitative easing was going to destroy the economy of this country. So at best, what he was trying to do was save the economy by bringing back manufacturing, by protecting the intellectual property drainage in this country. However, when you have the level of things that he had to go through, I think the deep state's really effect was to hit him with this coronavirus. And what's the end goal? Well, as you just rightfully said, when Obama was running, you had nearly, I think, 60,000 deaths, right, with H1N1. Here you have close to maybe 10,000 deaths. And we don't even know what the numerator and the denominator are here because they're blanketly assigning COVID-19 to people who may not even have it. And we're seeing a concomitant, number of, there's drop in pneumonia. So where's those drops? The people are getting the flu or in the flu season. So you have totally cooking of the books, and I can go more into detail on that. You have the cooking of the books. You have a political motive of the fact that the establishment elite did not want a guy like Donald Trump ever getting elected, and so he did get elected. So they've been reeling from that, and I don't think they want him to get a second term, nor do they want a guy like me to win in Massachusetts. But given that,
Exactly.
What you're looking at is a strategic move to essentially destroy the economy as using it as a vehicle to impose not only vaccine mandates, which we could talk about, but also as an opportunity to suppress dissent and destroy freedom as a way to curtail what a guy like Donald Trump can do, what people in America can do. And this has essentially been the modus operandi of people like Fauci for many, many years. But for him, this is a huge opportunity. And this ain't his first rodeo. This is his second rodeo if you go back looking at the HIV, AIDS, fake causality.
You know what? You just brought up something about the death count, and I wanted to touch on that with you. We are hearing reports from doctors who are saying they are being instructed to count deaths as coronavirus deaths, even if the person died from a different condition, but at some point in time had contact with somebody who had coronavirus. Dr. Birx just came out and said they're classifying everybody with the virus as a death instead of dying from the virus as a death. Why do you think that they are classifying this way? Why do you think there's an exaggeration in the numbers here, if you think there's an exaggeration in the death count numbers?
Look, what I do know is this, that the WHO, in conjunction with the CDC, is the one that decides what are called codes, diagnosis codes. Most people don't know, when you go into a doctor's office, a doctor looks at you, and in their IT systems, they have to say, okay, Christina has this or this. That is called a diagnosis code. That code, Christina, comes from the WHO. So for coronavirus, as I understand, they created two codes. One code was you explicitly, had a test and you had COVID-19. The other one was completely nebulous. Well, it sort of smells like that. Maybe he's got some chest pains, something so broad, but it was still under the COVID. The doctors in the United States received a letter from the CDC, as I have found out, that went to hospital administrators encouraging them to blur both of those codes. So if someone comes in, they have a pre-existing condition, someone with a chest pain, COVID-19, okay? And in fact, when someone dies, they do the test. Sometimes the test doesn't come back for 14 days. They're still putting COVID-19 on them. So they're increasing the numerator. And then as far as the denominator goes, we don't even know how many people actually have been infected because this is, again, a flu-type virus. So the denominator could be massive. So you have cooking of the books for two reasons. Hospital administrators get money for the COVID-19 diagnosis, plus they also get kickbacks through what are called GPOs and PBMs for the ventilators. So there's a total collusion going on, and it's not at all about people's lives. So those critically ill patients, immediately they put them on ventilators. And as I've shared in one of my videos, the ventilators actually can burst and further damage the lungs because the real issue here is the lungs are being filled with fluid. And the fluid is occurring because of the overreactive immune system, which can really be addressed by IV vitamin C, high dosage. And that is not in the discourse. In fact, 80 to 90% of the people go on ventilators are dying. So this is essentially a death sentence that they're putting people on.
Wow, that is so interesting. Well, President Donald Trump said that the cure cannot be worse than the problem, and yet here we are. We continue to be on lockdown status. Do you think the economy should have been closed in the first place? And is this the new status quo anytime we see a new virus?
It's a great question. In my letter to the president, which I sent on March 23rd, I said, look, we live in the era of personalized and precision medicine, which is an expertise of mine, which I get invited all over the world to talk about. What that means is one size does not fit all. You don't lock down everyone. That's what Fauci's model is. It's a medieval model of medicine. Mm-hmm. And so what we fundamentally have is the approach that we should be taking is taking the people who are truly immunocompromised, truly have COVID-19, fine, they should be isolated, boosted up with immunosupporting things like vitamin A, D, and C. Those of us who are well, we should be back to work. We should be running this economy. Okay, if you want to take something to support your immune system, do that, which should be the vitamin A, the D, etc. One of the two most disastrous things here are we're socially distancing people and hiding them. Go look at the research, a landmark study. When you isolate people, that is one of worse than the detriments from obesity, smoking, and heart disease. Social isolation actually leads to upregulation of inflammatory compounds in the body and down-regulation of antiviral compounds. So you're basically increasing the person for viral infection by the amount of stress you're causing them from social isolation. And separate from that, we're telling people not to go out in the sun, which is vitamin D. Vitamin D is an antimicrobial. Mm-hmm. So this is essentially a recipe for actually hurting people, not really supporting them, but all brought to you under the rubric, and media says it over and over again, social distancing, flatten the curve. And this is sort of the nonsensical science that Fauci is expounding, and it's what needs to be exposed, and really what we really need to talk about if we truly care about public health is building up people's immune system. But that's not what Fauci and company are concerned about. Their model is big ag, which dirty air, dirty water, dirty food. They want people to consume not food that's healthy for them. And then the solution is vaccine mandates. Think about what's going to happen a year from now. When you go to get your driver's license, Christina, where's your vaccine card? And Fauci's already talking about that.
Yes.
Can you go to a gym?
Yes, he is.
This is about developing a police state. I hate to use these very harsh terms, but that is what we're talking about, control of the individual. It's a very, very dangerous time, but it's also an opportunity for Americans to go back to our roots, which is freedom, which is basically listening to truth and basically starting to, take back what is really ours, which is our truth, freedom, and health. And Fauci's not about that. He serves the masters of Bill Gates, the Chan Zuckerbergs, the Clintons, the CDC, the WHO, and in fact, the Chinese. This is what we're seeing before in front of our eyes is exporting Chinese model of governance, top down, controlling the last oasis of freedom, which is our human body.
And it's very concerning. It's very scary, as well as social distancing. And we just have a little bit of time left here. Another thing they're pushing are these masks and these gloves. And I'm seeing people making these makeshift homemade masks and literally putting their lives in the hands of these masks and gloves. How well do these actually work? And you touched on it just briefly, but what is the real solution to coronavirus?
Look, the real solution, Christina, as any solution to any pathogen, we need to understand that the medical establishment, the pharmaceutical medical establishment for hundreds of years has built its entire foundation of always blaming a virus or a germ. Always. So when scurvy came around, remember scurvy when people's teeth would fall out and they had bleeding gums? Oh, it must be a virus. Well, it was deficiency in vitamin C 100 years later, when even people on the ground knew it. Mm-hmm. When pellagra came out, which was when people's skin and everything would get all dry, horribly dry, and like eczema, ultimate conditions. Oh, it must be the Italians who are coming over the ship. They're bringing some dirty germs, and we need to quarantine them. Well, it turned out it was a deficiency in niacin, so on. So what we're seeing here is the virus hunters, the bacterial hunters creating fear. So the real solution is, number one, is to recognize that the immune system is quite strong. We're actually a walking ecosystem of germs, 380 trillion viruses, 60 trillion bacteria among the 6 trillion cells. There's viruses all around us. The reality is a strong immune system always handles this beautifully. It's the weakened immune system. So all those masks and all this stuff, people didn't wear this for humanity, okay? The issue is, how do you beef up the immune system? As I wrote to the president, vitamin D. Vitamin D is an antimicrobial. Why do you think in many of these hot countries we don't hear any about this? Vitamin A, which is all from the rich leafy green, dark green vegetables and fruits. That supports your body to create keratin, cytokeratins through vitamin A, which protects your cells. So these are the two foundation pillars. Yet Fauci and Briggs do not talk anything about that because a V in vitamin is an anathema for their vaccines. And same with the V in vitamin C is an anathema for their ventilators. You see, it's ventilators and vaccines. Yeah. And this is big pharma. And these guys need to be fully exposed. And in my view, people like Fauci need to be indicted for a lot of serious scientific crimes. That's why when we put out this petition, Fire Fauci, I think close to 50,000 people have signed it in 48 hours. And at least we have close to 1,000 medical doctors from all over the world. Everyday people get this. In fact, the unfortunate handcuffed medical professionals get this. This is an opportunity, a huge opportunity, Christina. The real solution is for us to rethink how much governance and how much over-respect we give to MDs who unfortunately know nothing about the immune system. They don't study that in medical college or medical school.
Excellent points there, Dr. Shiva. Thank you so much for joining us here on America's Daily Report and sharing your insight. We appreciate you. Today, we're bringing back a man that everyone wants to hear from. He has multiple degrees from MIT, including a PhD in biological engineering. He is also running for Senate in 2020. Welcome back, Dr. Shiva. It is great to see you today.
Great to be here, Christine. Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, I have to address this. Since our last discussion, which went viral, we're talking upwards of 8 million views on analytics. Many people are thanking you for getting the truth out. Thousands are thanking you for getting the truth out there, but you've also been under some pretty extreme attacks. People are angry. They're mentioning the email. They're mentioning the H1N1 swine flu death count. What do you have to say about all of this?
Well, look, what we need to understand very clearly is that what we're witnessing right now is literally the convergence of the fake news media, big scientific establishment, and big pharma all coming together because they know that a guy like me is not supposed to be speaking out against them. A guy like me is supposed to be a sellout like most of the academics in the biological sciences who all rely on funding from big pharma and Fauci. And literally what we're talking about is the fact that a guy like me who came from nothing, from working class neighborhoods in New Jersey, who actually invented the first email system when I converted the entire interoffice mail system to the electronic form, called it email, Christina, and got the first US copyright. I never spoke a lot about it until it went into the Smithsonian 33 years later. After my mom died, she had saved all the beautiful artifacts. And when it went in, it was like a new skull was found in Africa. Now, up until then, I won every major award at MIT. I was on the front page for inventing many things. But the invention of email goes against that narrative because it was done in Newark, New Jersey, outside of the scientific establishment. And what we're talking about is some really corrupt, stupid people in the fake news media who don't know anything about science. They've never worked really that hard, don't know anything about math or engineering. And these people think that they're going to attack me and attack the facts that email was invented by a 14-year-old American kid before MIT, outside of the military-industrial complex. And in fact, TV was created by a 14-year-old boy in Franklin, Idaho. And the real issue here is, where does innovation come from? Where does real solutions come from? Does it come from big pharma? Does it come from people like Anthony Fauci, who's part of the scientific establishment? Or does it come bottoms up? That's what we're talking about. What we're witnessing right here is the fact that we have been brainwashed by the military-industrial academic complex to believe that they are the source of all truth, that they are the source of all health. When the history of humankind shows that innovation, science come from the outskirts. And after World War II, what we've seen was a consolidation of the academic establishment with the Manhattan Project, with Sputnik, that a few set of people think that they're going to control science, where they have a problem with someone like me. Because I got all the degrees, I was nominated for the National Medal of Technology and Innovation. I am a Fulbright scholar. I have 4 degrees from MIT. I'm known as a renowned scientist. I'm an author. So they have a problem because I'm not willing to be a good Indian and shake my head and sit in the lotus position. That's a problem that they have. And this problem ain't going to go away for them.
exactly. You've been very outspoken, very vocal, which we all appreciate. I want to read you a tweet that you recently posted. I want to read this to our viewers too. You said coronavirus fear-mongering by the deep state will go down in history as one of the biggest frauds to manipulate economies, suppress dissent, and push mandated medicine. Explain to us what you mean by that and tell us why you feel that way.
Well, look, first of all, the fundamental issue here is that when you look at the immune system of the body was designed over billions of years to take a hit and get more resilient. And so when I'm talking about using this coronavirus, using it as a vehicle to promote fear, so much fear that people have forgotten a fundamental issue here in science. It's a scientific fact that the people that will get attacked or will get harmed and suffer injuries or fatalities is not because of the virus. We have 380 trillion viruses inside of us. You know, there's tons of viruses outside of us. We have 60 trillion bacteria. We're a walking germ factory, Christina, all of us. We grew up in germs. We came out of germs. The reality is when you compromise the immune system, and we'll talk about AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, when you destroy the immune system with eating all sorts of horrible things, chemicals, some of it can be genetic, but a lot of it is epigenetic. When you destroy the immune system, what you fundamentally do is you open your body that the body is not able to modulate its immune system. And what is the immune system? The immune system is a fundamental operating system of our body. And when you compromise that, you create a situation where a pathogen that your body overreacts. So think about it this way. You have 2 arms and 2 legs. Now imagine I tied 2 of your, and I handcuffed you, and I only gave you your 2 legs to fight with, where you're going to, if an attacker comes to you, you're going to go flail at them like crazy to protect yourself. Well, that's what happens when you destroy, let's say, the innate and the adaptive, two parts of a very complex immune system. High sugar diets, you know what you do? You destroy your macrophages through gliotoxins. You destroy your T cells, and the body overreacts because you've handcuffed itself with the cytokine storm. And it's not, so your own body goes and not only tries to take out the viral proteins, but it also goes attacks parts of your body where those viral proteins tend to go to. In the case of coronavirus, to the epithelial cells. That's what's going on. The reality is that when I put out that tweet, I was looking at this as a scientist. I was saying this was extraordinary, because the reality is that that fear-mongering is intended to destroy the economy, which is what we've seen. 17 million people now have filed unemployment claims. Mm-hmm. We've seen it as a vehicle to destroy dissent, right? We had, if you go look all over the world prior to this, people have forgotten very quickly. Mm-hmm. There was protests in Hong Kong, protests in Wuhan 6 months ago, protests in France. We had 2 very populist leaders get elected, 3. Boris Johnson, right? You had Narendra Modi get reelected, and Donald Trump. There's a massive anti-establishment movement taking place across the world, and it's against the forces of people like Bill Gates, people like Zuckerberg, people like Hillary Clinton, people like the WHO, CDC, and the Chinese Communist Party, people who think that they know better than you and I. The reason my parents left India was there was a thing called the caste system, where there was a small set of people thinking they knew better, and all of us were nothing. And those people have not gone away. And they're not going to stop truth or freedom or health as long as I'm around, because I was fortunately educated by their system. I know how they operate. I know all their weaknesses. And one of the things I've learned is that the consolidation of the scientific establishment, the consolidation of big pharma, is creating a fascist environment in this world. And there's no other path that we have but to fight for our freedom. And that comes with going back to truth. And the truth is that email was invented by a 14-year-old kid. The truth is that the immune system is not so weak. And the truth is that health emerges decentralized. It's not going to be Chinese Communist Party top down, a bunch of people telling you and I what vaccines we should take. Health comes when you have a relationship with your healthcare practitioner, and out of that emerges health. That's where health comes from, because one size does not fit all. Your body, Christina, is different than my body. The nutrients you need are different than mine. That's what I learned growing up in India from my grandmother, right medicine for the right person at the right time. Yeah. And in fact, that is what the modern science of systems biology shows. Francis Collins at the NIH know this, but he chooses not to experience this because he and Fauci are all part of big pharma. They are basically agents of big pharma. And the Fire Fauci campaign is not just about him, but it's to send a signal that we must take back science, because science was supposed to be a noble service to humanity to expose the truth. And this guy isn't. He's literally Emperor Fauci. And it's time that he leaves or he be fired. And it's time that Donald Trump realize that he should not let a gun be put to his head, because these guys will come again 6 months from now. And at that time, they'll say, you know what? You want the economy to shut down? We better mandate vaccines. Let's give everyone immunity cards. That's where this is headed. And the fact that we've even gotten to the state shows that we must rise up right now. And the fake news media, which dare attack the fact that I invented email, which dare in fact diminish all the hard work I did as an American working class kid earning my degrees. I didn't, like Elizabeth Warren, lie to get into Harvard. I actually earned everything I have. So, to hell with them.
Okay. All right, we are going to touch on the Dr. Fauci petition, the Fire Dr. Fauci petition, a little bit later in this show. But first, I want to talk on what you just mentioned, the fake news media. You've seen the coronavirus briefings. Nearly all of the reporters are so focused on attacking President Donald Trump. In addition, all the mainstream media headlines, right? They push fear and doom and gloom. I want to put up another social media post that you posted out. It says the fake news colludes with fake science to create fake problems, fake solutions, fake history to drive us into slavery and fascism. You just talked about this a little bit, but why is the mainstream media so advantageous in pushing the coronavirus agenda?
Very, very simple. You have to understand that the entire publishing industry, the entire medical establishment industry, the entire big pharma industry, they all hang out in the same circles, Christina. They're one. And the reason is they do not want any attacks on them. I'm attacking the fake news media. I'm attacking the scientific establishment, and they will stick together. And that's why it's time that we, the people, rise up and recognize these people aren't disparate entities. They communicate together. They must disparage people who talk about real science. They must disparage truth, because everything they do is based on lies. It's based on this top-down model. If anything, they want to bring made in China to America. They want to export China everywhere. That's what this is about. And fundamentally, the fake news media is made up of people who owe money, they owe service to big pharma, big vaccines, and that's what they're about. They all hang out in the same circles. Come on. Jeffrey Epstein was probably among them. Weinstein was all part of them. The president of MIT took money from Jeffrey Epstein after he knew he was convicted. Same did the president of Harvard. So we're talking about is a set of people who are one small family, and they believe that they're going to control our lives. It wasn't sufficient that they lost the Revolutionary War and they had to, go back to England or whatever. They lost their monarchies. These people fundamentally think they know better. And that's what Bill Gates is about. And that's what Hillary Clinton is about. Both of them. And you have to understand, we also have to be aware of the not so obvious establishment, like people like Bobby Kennedy, who on the one hand attacks Bill Gates, but he doesn't say anything about Hillary Clinton. So we have to understand who our leaders are going to be. Are they going to be top-down people? Or are they going to be bottoms-up people like myself and you and others? We need a bottoms-up movement. No more Kennedys, no more Gateses, no more Bernie Sanders who sell out people. It's about a bottoms-up revolutionary movement that we need to win. And we're talking about freedom versus slavery. That's what this is about.
Yeah, and you just mentioned Bill Gates, right? You have said that the coronavirus was a well-executed plan by Bill Gates. Today, Gates slammed President Trump for suspending funding to the WHO. He said that the world needs, this is what Bill Gates said, the WHO now more than ever. This is in response to President Trump suspending that funding. He also said no one can replace the WHO in slowing the spread of the coronavirus, and this is as dangerous as it sounds. Those are quotes from Bill Gates. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, look, you just need to understand that Bill Gates is a fake innovator. He didn't build DOS. His mama and papa helped him find it from someone else and sell it. His entire career has been based on the inside. He knows nothing about biological sciences. What he thinks, he's trying to create a legacy where he literally took money that was tax dollars and put it into a foundation, and he thinks top down, him and his wife are going to tell us what to do. Bill Gates, fundamentally, he created Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. Him and Hillary Clinton worked on that together. The WHO is part of that. And if you look at the WHO's SDG 3 goals, Sustainable Development Goals, it's to create this fake utopia and say that the way we're going to get to that utopia, a land of no poverty, income inequality, all this stuff, top-down model, is going to come from vaccinating everyone. The IA 2030 report, and he's a critical element of it. He's a neo-missionary. He thinks he's going to help all the dark people of the world by him coming and swooping in and giving everyone GMOs and vaccines. This guy is a criminal, just like Fauci. They all work together. And by the way, I believe Fauci sits on his board, on his leadership council. So all these people need to talk about all the incestuous things that they do. And fundamentally, if they cared about public health, really cared about it, let's talk about why we have such high levels of obesity in the United States. Let's talk about why we have medical errors. Let's talk about why we have 1.9 million hospitalizations from pharmaceuticals. Let's talk about those adverse reactions. They don't give a damn about public health. What they care about is power, profit, and control. If they cared about public health, we would be talking about vitamin D, vitamin A, and all of these guys that Bill Gates would be saying, oh my God, let's give those people on crisis who are about to be put on ventilators a death sentence. Why don't we give them high-dose vitamin C? He's not talking about that because they don't want vitamins to compete with vaccines. They don't want vitamins to compete with ventilators. That's what this is about. And it's time we destroy the medical establishment. They do not serve humanity. They serve themselves. And MDs listening out there, you guys are hostages. You know it. You guys get abused every day. You guys have Stockholm syndrome. And many MDs, a lot of wonderful people went into medicine with the noble service. But you know what? They got golden handcuffs. And now they actually don't have that many golden handcuffs. They're realizing with the coronavirus, they're actually being made no different than the frontline medical workers who get treated like dirt. So it's time that people recognize these people don't give a damn about public health. Because if they did, we would have clean air, clean water, clean food. The United States has a D+ in infrastructure. Massachusetts has an F- in infrastructure. We have one uniparty here. The Mass GOP establishment does not want me there. They work together with the Democratic Party. Massachusetts got an F-, Christina, in infrastructure. Wow. Horrible roads, horrible bridges, horrible water systems. And they got a D+ in corruption, the worst in corruption. That's what MIT and Harvard have delivered, which are the centers of the deep state. And that's why my winning the U.S. Senate seat, it's not about me. It's for every working person that we're going to take back freedom. We're going to take back truth. We're going to take back health, which is what our campaign is about at Shiva for Senate. You know, that's what we built. And bottoms up, our movement is building people, not only everyday working people. We have so many mothers who are coming out because they don't want their kids to be forced vaccine mandated. They want to have choice.
Right.
That's what our movement is bringing up.
Well, and I want to talk about that movement and how people can get involved with it a little bit later in the show. But first, I want to show you this headline from the New York Times. It was just published. It says in big letters, New York City death toll soars past 10,000 in revised coronavirus count. And then a little bit lower in smaller letters, it says the city has added more than 3,700 additional people who were presumed to have died of the coronavirus but had never tested positive. Okay, so the number one question that I'm hearing from people who are flooding me with emails and calls is, why are they attributing all deaths to coronavirus? Now, we touched on the codes a little bit in our last discussion, but people want to know, why would the doctors, these medical doctors that they trust, the health departments that they trust, why would they do this?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, you know, this is, if you look at the entire health establishment, if you look at the entire healthcare system, remember it's top down. In 2000, there was a Safe Harbor Act around that period, which got passed, you know, plus or minus some years, which really allowed GPOs and PBMs to give kickbacks to hospital administrators. Who were GPOs and PBMs? People should go research them. Group purchasing organizations and PBMs on the pharmaceutical side into pharmacies. These are middlemen, Christina. The middlemen really crank up the cost of every hospital supply that goes into a hospital. They mark it up by 5, 10, 10,000 times. They are motivated to always put everything into a code and everything to go through their supply chain. So you have massive corruption in the healthcare system. The Safe Harbor Act needs to be reversed. So fundamentally, what you have happening is there is an incentive to brand people COVID-19. There is an incentive to put more people on these ventilators. But one of the critical things we need to understand is that one of the data that people need to also see, that I've seen, is that the numbers, you know, we're still in the flu season, has gone down concomitantly as these numbers have gone up. And as you know, there's enough reports out there, people can listen to others, that there's an incentive for people to brand people as COVID-19. And moreover, they're using a PCR, you know, a DNA polymerase chain reaction experiment, which is highly, highly dubious. Even the guy who created it said it's a qualitative test. It's not even a definitive test. So you have cooking of the books. Remember, the WHO, Tedros's group, is the one who created the two codes, the COVID positive, and then they created another code, which said, well, sort of looks like and feels like COVID-19. So they're putting everyone into that because New York, let's be honest, you have Andrew Cuomo there. Andrew Cuomo really doesn't care for President Trump. The other piece you have there is you have a high preponderance, in Houston, for example, high preponderance of, African Americans are getting this. And it's not because they're black, it's because the black community historically has been abused by the Democratic Party and the establishment because they were never given infrastructure. Their health is ruined in many, many ways. They preponderance have a high level of more immunocompromised people than everyday white people. But this has happened by organization. So if we want to really talk about those 10,000 numbers, why don't the hospitals release? I want to see, they don't have to give the people's names, their medical histories. What was their pre-existing conditions? How old were they? Let's talk about diabetes and high blood pressure. Let them do that. Let's put it up on the cloud so we can all see it. We have that data. Let Andrew Cuomo do that. But he's not going to do that because this entire crisis about saying this virus is going to kill all of us and destroy all of us is really a pretext for mandated vaccines, for mandated top-down medicine. That's what it's about. That's what this entire thing is about because Big Pharma is losing. If you look at their business model, Christina, they're not making any money through their traditional pharmaceutical drugs. People are starting to, look at vitamins. People want to eat better. So pharmaceutical drug manufacture, their entire business model is blowing up in front of them, literally because you can sue a pharmaceutical drug company. It's $5 billion to make a drug. It's high cost. Look at what happened to Sanofi. Diabetes drug, their cardiovascular drugs are losing money. So they need a new territory. Well, you know what that is? It's vaccines. Why? No liability at all. Ted Kennedy, forced through a law which basically created the vaccine courts. You and I, if your children get hurt, we can't sue the vaccine manufacturers. We can pharma, but we can't them. So low risk, no liability, and high profit. That's what Bill Gates, that's what Chan Zuckerberg, and that's what the corrupt Hillary Clinton want. They want to be part of this clique who they all hang around. They all go to the same parties. This is an aristocratic clique. That's what we're talking about. And they don't give a damn about you and I. They don't give a damn about public health. Nothing. Because if they did, why would they let Monsanto and these companies destroy the soil of Africa and India and most of the countries on the planet and destroy American people's health? That's what they've done. That's why 54% of the kids in America have autoimmune disorders. 1 out of 5 kids has some type of mental disorder. That's what they've delivered us. What Anthony Fauci has delivered us in the Western world, we have a country with the highest infant mortality rate and the lowest longevity rate. How dare that he stand up there and talk about public health? He knows nothing about public health.
Well, let's talk about Fauci. You mentioned it not too long ago in the discussion, that petition that you started, Fire Fauci. It has more than 70,000 signatures at this point in time.
75,000.
75 now? More than 3,000 of those are from medical doctors. You've been very vocal. You've been very brave when talking about Fauci. You continue to do it today, yet still people are saying that we need to listen to the experts. We need to listen to Dr. Fauci. He is the expert. What is your response to them in terms of why we shouldn't listen to Fauci and the so-called experts who have been wrong on every single model they've put out there on the coronavirus?
Well, if Mr. Fauci is an expert, let him explain the deterioration of health in this country. Why is obesity rates increased? Why is the FDA... Why is the FDA, let him talk about this, why is the FDA saying that jams and jellies have to have 40% sugar in it to be characterized as jams and jellies? Let him talk about why we have seen massive amounts of hospital debts, that 440,000. Let him talk about what drugs do, what the adverse reactions they cause. But he won't talk about that because this guy is not an expert. What he is, he's a bureaucrat. He represents where academia has gone, where the scientific establishment has gone. It supports and it encourages and it creates bureaucrats like him, little fascists. That's what it creates. And he's able to manipulate presidents because many of them do not understand science. Many of them did not learn math and engineering anymore. Remember, when the founders of this country, Washington actually knew what sine and cosine meant. He was a surveyor. Jefferson built beautiful buildings. And Franklin actually knew engineering. But our presidents and our politicians know jack about any of this. 70% are lawyer lobbyists. That's why a guy like him is able to bamboozle people. He's the one who convinced everyone that HIV creates AIDS. And I'll debate anyone. You know what you should do, Christina? Call every one of those scientists. They can bring all of them, and it'll be me, and perhaps Peter Duesberg will join me. And we can take every one of them on, and we can show them that the lie that they created to create the AIDS industry, and that's what they're trying to do. They have an idiot like Lady Gaga who's now supporting Gavi. Okay, they and you know, when I was out in Hollywood, they used to call him star. You know, you can put the word F whatever. Okay, that's what these people are. They work with the prostitution model of Hollywood, with the prostitution model of academia, and that's who works together. It's not about science. In fact, there's some great actors, very few of them left in Hollywood, but they diminish them. It's about celebrityhood. It's about academia. It's not about science or craft anymore. So what Fauci represents is he represents the utmost of corruption. That's what he represents. He represents a guy who's wheedled his way through by lying and creating fake science. And he thinks he's going to get away with it. Well, I challenge him to any debate to prove to me why he thinks that this virus and another virus, the next one that's coming along, is going to damage the immune system. And what is he going to do about boosting people's immune system? Why doesn't he talk about vitamin D? Has he ever heard of cathelicidins? Maybe he hasn't. Why doesn't he talk about vitamin A and cytokeratins? Why doesn't he talk about vitamin C? Why doesn't he talk about the GAPDH receptors? Let's talk to him, or those molecules that get created in the cytokine storm. Let's have a scientific discussion, he and I. Open,
and we
public.
can do that. This will be a public invite to talk to Fauci, to come onto this show and debate you on these issues. We will host both of you here. I know our viewers will be highly interested in that. Some of our viewers, a lot of our viewers, a lot of people out there have actually grown tired of this. Things have been happening over the last week. Protests in Ohio, North Carolina, Vancouver, Berlin. Today there's protesters in Michigan. I've seen the word revolution popping up everywhere. People are tired. They want to reopen the economy. They're not buying into the virus fear yet. Experts keep pushing social distancing. Fauci just said that when the country eventually reopens, we're not going to have fans in the stands at major sporting events. Then Bill Gates, which you touched on a little bit earlier, he said this recently on the Ellen DeGeneres show. Take a listen.
And then, with luck, in early June, if the whole country does a better job of shutting down and we get prioritization of the testing that's going on, what policies should we have? Because until we get almost everybody vaccinated globally, we still won't be fully back to normal.
Okay, Dr. Shiva, you just talked about this, about the global vaccinations that they want to have mandated, then the social distancing. How dangerous will this be if the social distancing lasts? In Fauci's terms, he wants it to last forever, to our country, our people, and then saying that we're going to have to shut down until global vaccinations happen?
Well, look, you know what Bill Gates should do? Why doesn't he shut down everything he does? Why doesn't he take all his money and devolve it out to people who are suffering right now? Why doesn't he do that? Let him put his money where his mouth is, because if he believes that we should shut it down, why doesn't he shut down the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? Why doesn't he take all of his money and do that? Let him talk about that. But he won't, because he doesn't give a damn about the American working people. He doesn't give a damn about crashing this economy, because that's part of the goal. The part of the deep state goal is to force the government, force Trump, force the economic policy people to backfill in. And by the way, this comes from a senior person who called me up. I can't tell his name, but a senior economist very close to the White House said, Shiva, Fauci is destroying the economy. Please keep doing your videos. All right?
Wow.
Exactly. This is why do you think I've been doing my videos? Because he said, Shiva, we are being told to backfill in economic policy by health policy leading it. That's why this came from somewhere, which I can't talk about. So I'm doing this as a noble service, putting myself out there, because the bottom line is the economists are being told to print money. 6 trillion has been printed to save this country. The reality is what it's doing is it's going to be the biggest transfer of wealth to, again, more elite people. China will take a lot of those reserve dollars, and as this economy tanks, they'll buy more U.S. assets like they did AMC theaters, et cetera.
Yes.
So this is entirely a model. Bill Gates, let's find out where all his homes are. Let's understand how much land his foundation has brought, perhaps in Africa. This entire model is about a global set of elites like this guy who knows nothing about the biological sciences, didn't grow up in working class neighborhoods, doesn't understand what it means to be a working person, him thinking he knows better. And I'll challenge him too. Let he and I have a conversation about the immune system. Let him come here and defend himself. Let's talk science. Let's not talk nonsense. Let's talk science. Bill Gates and Fauci, Francis Collins, I'll take all three of them on. And they won't be able to defend themselves because the fundamental issues, the truth will come out that what they're really about is promoting an agenda. It's about propaganda. It's about fear-mongering people. And it's about fear-mongering particularly the vulnerable educated elites. Because you know what the good news is though? The plumber, the electrician, working people who actually work with their hands know this is all BS. And that's why they're going to uprise, and maybe we should have a good revolution in this country. Maybe it's about time that we put an end to this hegemony of a small set of people. And by the way, most of those people, the epicenter of them is between the 1 mile radius between MIT and Harvard. The epicenter of the deep state is right over there. And I know where it is, and I've known it since I came here in 1981. Fortunately, I've learned all of how they operate, and I know all their weaknesses, and it's time that that establishment be smashed because they do not serve the interests of working people at all. They serve the interests of people like Weinstein and Epstein. In fact, they gave him parties, and they supported him. They took his money.
And you're doing a great job here calling them out. Final question here. After our last discussion, a lot of our viewers had questions about your statement that HIV does not cause AIDS. Can you explain that statement to our viewers?
Sure.
Maybe clarify it?
Yeah, it's very, very important people understand this, okay? Tens of millions of people, 60, you can look at the percentage. I haven't looked at it. A large proportion of people in Zambia, for example, have HIV. HIV is a virus, okay? It's not like a small little virus. It appears in many, many bodies. Lots of Africans have it. We don't have epidemics of people dying. The reality is, getting back to this point, if you go look at it, Peter Duesberg, everyone should look at Peter's work. Peter was one of the earliest members to the National Academy of Science. I think if not the youngest. He was one of the earliest tenured professors at Berkeley. Peter was an eminent guy. He was a discoverer of the oncogene. When the HIV/AIDS causality, remember, these guys are always trying to tie some little microbe. It's like a district attorney always trying to find some criminal, okay? Trying to associate always a virus or a bacteria with a crime, right? In this case, AIDS. Well, what is AIDS? AIDS is acquired immune deficiency syndrome. It's when your T cell count in your body goes below a certain level. Well, when you look at the first set of AIDS cases that came, and Peter Duesberg and others were the first to point this out, well, it turns out a preponderance of them, 80, 90% of them were gays who were taking amyl nitrates. And remember, it was a time in American history where there was lots and lots of drugs, people partying all night. One gay guy would have maybe 1,500 lovers. Okay, this is not politically incorrect. It was a fact. Lots of partying people were compromising their immune system. Amyl nitrates, nearly 200 papers written showing how it compromises the immune system. The second group of people who were getting blood transfusions, well, it's not the blood, it's the fact that they were getting immunosuppressive drugs. And the third group of people were, heavy IV drug users, okay? Those three groups of people destroy their immune systems. Well, they go find this virus, HIV. By the way, many of those people had many other viruses. And the CDC, at that time, at least even now, doesn't keep great data. So they associated, oh, this virus goes with this. And Robert Gallo, the guy who did enormous amount of scientific misconduct at the time, and people can go look at his name, he created the HIV test. He's the one who stole data from the French. And guess who came to his rescue? Fauci. Fauci came to his rescue. Gallo went into the back end, and then Fauci came up on the forefront promoting the HIV causality with AIDS. Again, let's debate this. Let's call all the scientists together. Let's have a discussion about, does HIV cause AIDS? There's a set of postulates called Koch's postulates. K-O-C-H-S. What is Koch's postulates? Koch's postulates was designed around the time by Robert Koch at the time of the germ theory. And Koch's postulates basically say that in order to say that this virus or this bacteria causes this disease, Christina, you have to show at least four things. One, you have to find an abundance, not a little bit, but an abundance of that virus in the host where the disease is, okay? Step one. Step two, you have to be able to culture that virus in a petri dish. And then third, you have to inject it into another, let's say, animal, and it should get the exact same symptoms as the other one, as the original. And then you should be able to culture it back. Well, they haven't been able to do this with the HIV/AIDS stuff. And in fact, if you look at many of these diseases, they haven't been able to do it. They tried, it's called virus hunters. After polio, after the big polio vaccine came, right, and went, all these virus hunters were looking for a new job. And then what they did, they said, oh, viruses also cause cancer, retroviruses. And the leader, one of the founders of that was Peter Duesberg, Oncogenes. He's a guy who discovered a retrovirus, but he even said this is nonsense, okay? So what you have is you have virus hunters, bacteria hunters, like district attorneys who want to pin every crime on somebody, even though they may not have done that crime. And that's what big pharma, big vaccines want to do. So it's fear-based medicine. And it ignores the fact, completely ignores the fact we're surrounded by viruses. We're surrounded by viruses. I mean, I'm getting emails from people saying, hey, I haven't seen my boyfriend in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I have a very, very close friend of mine. His wife just went into major depression. 40 years. You know why? She can't go out with her friends. She can't play, her bridge game. She's in severe depression. It's awful. And you know what really hurts people? You know what hurts people's immune system more than a freaking virus? It's social isolation. And that's been a lot of work. 1988 landmark study, a famous paper written showing that when you socially isolate people, you destroy their immune systems. You lower their antiviral activity, you increase inflammatory compounds. So let me just repeat, with all due respect to all of these people, they may be nice people, they all have families, but they don't give a damn about public health. They've sold out to the devil, and that devil is big pharma. That devil is top-down establishment model of how the world should exist. China, right? China believes that the enlightened few will run their whole country like a factory. This is why in China, the everyday people in China have been running huge protests under threat of life against pollution. Well, why is China so polluted? Because the Paris Accords, based on fake science that CO2 is a pollutant, allows China to pollute. Let me repeat, to all you liberals listening out there who care about, all your little nice gardens and meditating in New Age, which, I like meditating, but you know what? The Paris Accords has nothing to do with lowering pollution. It encourages China, which pollutes 11 billion carbon metric tons, to go up to 22 billion. That's not healthy. And people in China have been fighting for their health. They've been out on the streets protesting, including in Wuhan. They had fights with police, and that was 6 months before. And now we don't hear anything about Wuhan. We don't hear anything about Hong Kong. So everyone, you're listening, you know what? Truth is going to win here, and people need to start using their common sense. We wouldn't be here, 7.2 billion people. I don't care if it's bioweapons or this. Our body has a very strong immune system. Feed it. Vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin C. And you know what? Above all of that, connections with people, love, understanding, fellowship, laughter. This is why the number one source that people live long, people who smoke, a little bit overweight, the number one reason, because they had social connections, social relationships. Number two was they did some type of exercise. Number three was they all drank a local fermented drink. And those local fermented drinks support the microbiome, which is your gut bacteria, which is very important for immune health.
Okay, one last thing here. I got to get this in quickly. How can people support you in your run for Senate?
Everyone listening out there, our run for U.S. Senate in Massachusetts is going to be one of the most important elections for the world. It's because one of you is running, me, okay, for you. And what I mean by that, if you go to shivaforsenate.com and you go to our website, you'll see it says Truth, Freedom, Health. And it says revolution, a revolution for truth, freedom, and health. And it's saying that without freedom, we don't have truth. Without truth, we don't get health. And without health, we don't get freedom. Freedom to debate, discuss. That's why I'm inviting these guys to have a discourse. Let's talk about science, because with real science, we'll get to truth. And with real truth, we'll find real solutions for our body. And that's when we build strong system. That's what our campaign's about. Everyone should go there, click on that donate button. But when you click on that donate button, you're not donating to me. I'm going to give you something. I'm going to give you a book. I'm going to give you your body, your system, a tool that'll teach you how your body's a system. And we had it, I think, priced up there for $25. If people can't afford that, give 5 or 10. And if you can't afford that, write to me, vashiva@vashiva.com, V as in Victor, A Shiva, and tell me what your economic situation, and we'll give you a full scholarship. But that's what our campaign is about. And if people scroll down, Christina, we must get on the ballot. The establishment, GOP establishment, which is one, Charlie Baker, who's a Republican, is running 3 lawyers. He's got another lawyer he threw in, so I wouldn't get the GOP nomination. And then I'm running against 2 other lawyers, Joe Kennedy and Ed Malarkey, okay? So it's a working class guy who actually creates against 3 doofuses. 3 lawyers by the establishment. So people go to Shiva for Senate and they scroll down, you will see a thing that says get Shiva on the ballot. Click on that and fill in your name, and we will send you out nomination papers. You got to get this out to everyone, Christina. We'll send you out those nomination papers. Fill them out. You have to be in Massachusetts. So everyone listening, if you know someone in Massachusetts, call them up right now. Tell them, hey, go to Shiva for Senate, scroll down, fill out that ballot, and we'll send you out the nomination papers. We need probably another 5,000 to 7,000 more signatures. Our amazing volunteers were on the ground collecting, Christina. Now the governor has sent out police to stop us, even though we're not violating any rules. That's the fascism that's taking place. But we need everyone to watch and support this campaign because it is your campaign. We need to take back this country, for that matter, the world, from those people who think they know better than you and I. We don't, we need, because they think they're running the new kingdoms. And it's time we delivered them a massive, massive defeat. And my winning here will be our winning. ShivaForSenate.com.
All right. Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Shiva, for all of your insight today. It was great to see you again.
Point here, because you posted something last week that I reported on your tweet, and this is where you said that the CV fear, the fear-mongering by the deep state, will go down in history as one of the biggest frauds to manipulate economies, suppress dissent, and push mandated medicine. Now, you were tweeting in response to President Trump's claim that Democrats were inflaming the situation, the crisis, for political reasons. How did you come to the conclusion that what we're experiencing now is one of the biggest frauds in history?
Yeah, so if you look at that tweet, if you can bring it up again, if I can ask you to do that, if you look at that tweet, the 3 things, it's a very potent tweet because, first of all, I got my PhD in biological engineering at MIT. No, I didn't pay for that. I got 4 degrees, in fact, at MIT because of my deep interest, remember, in medicine. And the Department of Biological Engineering was a new department MIT created in 2003 to really, because there was a revolution taking place in biology saying we needed to take a systems approach to biology. The second part of that tweet is I'm considered one of the renowned people, world-renowned people in understanding the immune system and precision and personalized medicine. In fact, 4 months before I put this out, I was invited to present the distinguished lecture at the National Science Foundation on my thesis on the modern immune system. So that's one part of my scientific life. The other parts here are very important because I've been a student of politics since I was a kid because I grew up in India, which had a caste system. People like, you won't find a lot of Indians like me here. My parents were considered, and I was considered, an untouchable, which is the lowest of the Indian caste system. It's like, people calling the Trumpers deplorables, okay? And so when you look at this, the tweet is really addressing 3 things. You have people using fear to manipulate economies, suppress dissent, which is what the hierarchical system, the upper caste used to do. Shut up, fall in line, shut the hell up, right? And push mandated medicine because, look, the medical system we're moving towards is a top-down system, totally controlled by big pharma, big ag, and big vaccine manufacturers. And that's what I was putting out. So it's a very potent tweet because if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals that were put into, signed off by the United Nations and all their countries in 2015, it's called SDG, 2015, SDG 3, which was signed in 2015, Sustainable Development Goals. What it says is they paint a utopia, Gary, and you can read it. People should go check it out. No income inequality, support, there's no, in fact, no sexuality anymore. You should go read it. It's quite extraordinary. It's this utopia of the elites, okay? And subsequently, in an Immunization 2030 document as an addendum to that, they say the way we get to utopia, these 17 goals, is we must immunize everyone on the planet, e.g. vaccinate everyone, okay? It's quite extraordinary. So what we've developed, and the reason this is important is, look, I created a company called Cytosolve, Cytosolve. Cytosolve is one of the other inventions I did out of my PhD work to use the computer to understand chemical reactions in our body and on our cell, to basically use a computer to model diseases so we could eliminate the need for animal testing and we could discover how medicines interacted for toxicity as well as for combination therapy. This is exactly what my grandmother did, Gary. She would combine different herbs. When I made, there's a video I did recently on Twitter, I showed how you make chicken curry, right? Or lamb curry, okay? Or if you make, the history of humankind has been learning how to use our environment, food as medicine. So Cytosolve is this amazing invention which allows me to do in a different way what my grandmother did intuitively, which is to understand the combinations and mixtures of chemicals to figure out medicines from food and natural products faster, cheaper, and safer. So that technology, when I built that, I said, wow, pharma guys would want to use this because it takes them 15 years to build a drug, $5 billion. And I don't know if you know this, the pharma industry is in peril right now. They're not making any money, really any money from pharmaceutical drugs because lots and lots of investment in R&D, and they're getting less and less new drugs allowed by the FDA because of their toxicity. So what pharma companies have moved to is vaccines. The 1986 the vaccine court was created. John Kennedy implemented the National Vaccination Act in 1962 under a fake science or an outdated science of the understanding of the immune system. That led to many injuries that took place between 1962 to 1986. In a response to those injuries, another Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, led the creation of the National Vaccine Injury Program, which led to the creation of the vaccine courts, not in the judicial department, but under Health and Human Services, which basically allowed indemnification of vaccine manufacturers so you couldn't sue them, and the maximum liability for death was $250,000, okay? And so we're at a situation now that for pharma companies, vaccines are pure profit, no liability, no risk, they can't get sued, okay? So that's what I meant by mandated medicine, because as someone who's been involved in this field for many years, when I came into looking at the one-size-fits-all vaccine program, there were other activists in this field, and frankly, many of them were controlled opposition. People like Bobby Kennedy was playing a good game saying he's against vaccines. Meanwhile, he endorses Hillary Clinton, who is vaccine queen, okay? So the position I took was I said, we need to really educate people on the immune system. You'll see the videos I started doing. They started going viral. A lot of the mothers said, wow, this guy's a real fighter. We've been involved in this movement for 17 years. It hasn't gone anywhere. Here's Dr. Shiva educating us, and the movement started taking off. And then, in fact, 5 days before the coronavirus stuff hit, about a week before, is when we won a major victory in New Jersey, okay, against these vaccine mandates. So that's what that tweet is about. It's really, it's a pretty cool tweet when I look back. It was a convergence of many things about what my life has been about politics, and essentially the deep state of a few set of people, from the Gates Foundation to the Zuckerbergs to Hillary Clinton, congealed with the UN and the deep state elites, believing that they're going to they're going to fear monger on coronavirus because of the ignorance of the medical profession. Most MDs do not know what the immune system is. They frankly have no idea. They don't even study nutrition. And based on that ignorance, they were going to scare the hell out of people with the coronavirus, the quote unquote invisible enemy. I think I just put a tweet out. What an amazing way, right? You scare people with the virus, no one even can see it, right? And then you use that fear to essentially say, we need to do this for the quote unquote common good. That's what we're seeing go on. And it's an amazing recipe for fascism.
It's terrifying to consider. And what also is terrifying to consider is there's speculation, considerable speculation, that the virus is actually a manufactured bioweapon. Now, the State Department, among others, are pushing back against that narrative, simply calling it Chinese and Russian disinformation. So let me ask you this. What are the origins of this theory, and is there any truth to it?
Yeah, so let me go to the scientific origin, and then some of the stuff, one of my researchers, I went through a bunch of documents on this. So first is, if you look at a virus, you're showing a picture there, the virus is composed of broadly three major entities, right? Those things that come out of it, those S proteins, those little protrusions, then the surface of the virus, and the stuff inside the virus, which is a ribonucleic acid, which is really the quote unquote DNA of the virus. So what happens is this kind of virus, if you think about a big ball representing your cell, these little particles land on that cell, and their goal is to get into the cell and use your cell's machinery to replicate themselves, okay? They don't destroy the cell. They use the cell's machinery to replicate, and they replicate, and they replicate, okay? So that's what a virus tries to do. By the way, we have about 380 trillion viruses in our body. It's called a virome. We have about 60 trillion bacteria in our body, and we have about 6 trillion cells, which is what we're made of, okay? Separate from those other things. So the virus essentially goal is to get into the cell. So first of all, it needs to be able to hang on to the surface, right? And be able to send its DNA, there you go, the RNA, into the cell, because when that happens, it uses your own cell machinery through that RNA to replicate itself, okay? So that is sort of, the sort of overview of what these viruses are trying to do. Now, the RNA sequence in this, and so the two ways it gets in is a protein surface has to be able to stick. I'm making it sort of in simple terms, to be able to go into it. So the RNA, the sequence of this protein is about 1,500 base sequences, which are different than the SARS or the MERS, which are also coronavirus. By the way, the coronavirus is a class of viruses that create flus, okay? These ones create respiratory syndrome, okay? RS. Acute respiratory syndrome is what SARS was, and MERS was Middle East respiratory syndrome, and this is coronavirus, COVID. But what people noticed was that there was a sequence of this DNA, around 1,500 base pairs, that were different than the others, and they're always different, right? That's where they're different virus. But the question comes in, was that difference formed from a natural mutation, okay? Because everything's constantly going through random mutation. And some people have asserted that the base sequences there are very difficult to occur in nature, okay? That they were recombined from other components. So that's where that comes from. So the issue really comes down, the scientific question is a probability of those base sequences being different, okay? That's where it comes from. Now, separate from that, there have been reports that the Wuhan virus was very different. The coronavirus in Wuhan was a different strain than the one that was in Iran versus the one that was in Italy. And there's reports that I've read, it's hard to verify a lot of this, that all of those different viruses go back to one common branch, which actually goes back to Fort Detrick, okay, in the United States and North Carolina. And there's other, again, these are suppositions that the US military or deep state sent people over to Wuhan, and that's how it got given in China. This is one theory. And the reason this comes up is because if you look at the first 41 cases, first of all, they haven't been able to find case 0, okay? But of the 41 cases, approximately 13 of these people, they're totally disconnected to these people, okay? So the thesis is that this came from somewhere else into Wuhan. Now, whether it came in or not, my view is that if you believe in the concept of a set of people who don't care about the US national interest or the Chinese national interest or the Indian national interest or Italian, they're more care for their own global interests. And, nowadays, it would not, given, the level of collusion that we've seen that takes place on so many levels, that, you could view a scenario where it got created by the deep state and got put out there really to suppress dissent. Let me tell you what was going on at this time. Hong Kong was blowing up. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right. And what people do not know is 6 months before the coronavirus, there were massive anti-pollution protests by Chinese citizens in Wuhan, in the same city where this came from. And remember, you don't protest in China without risking your life. It's not like they have the First Amendment there. So large numbers of people are taking to the street and protesting, tens of thousands, because the Chinese government was going to build one of the largest incinerator plants there, which was going to just spew out pollution. By the way, the Paris Accords allows China to pollute, double their pollution. And the people in China, the everyday people, really care about their health, and there have been pollution protests since 2007, anti-pollution protests. But Wuhan was extremely growing, and then you don't hear any news about it. And then also remember, in the United States, the anti-vaccine movement was growing, okay? So, there's a scenario that becomes, to me, very interesting. You have Trump in the United States could not be taken down from Russian collusion. Trump could not be taken down from impeachment, right? And how extraordinary is it that this thing comes out, the timeless of it. You see Hong Kong completely disappear, serves the globalists, because they don't have to do, because remember, any protest creates uncertainty for globalism, right? You see Wuhan go away, and then you see now an argument is saying, of course we should vaccinate everyone, right? Against the anti-vaccine movement. So that's why I put that out.
Wow.
And when you're a student of politics and a student of medicine, you start seeing these connections, and you also recognize that the academic elite in this country is basically practices the oldest profession. No one in the academic elite is saying anything. Fortunately, I don't owe anything to academia. I made my own money by myself. I have the training to call out a guy like a Fauci, to call this out, because I understand the science, and most people in the field of immune systems don't really understand the science of immune systems. If you ask a typical doctor, if you ask them, well, what is a virus and how does the immune system work? They actually think that the virus is some big boogeyman, it's got big claws like alligators, and it goes into your body and starts eating your tissues, right? Like the Ebola thing, and you spew blood, and the vaccine blocks that, okay? That's their understanding of the immune system, and it's far from that, and we can talk more about that.
Yeah, I want to get into the vaccine itself, because that's certainly in the works, as you know. What is your opinion of this vaccine currently?
Well, look, I think there's several companies attempting to do the vaccine, and one of the newest types of vaccine is called a nucleic acid vaccine, nucleic acids, right? Where you're injecting. The old model of a vaccine was you actually take the virus particle itself, you create an attenuated version of it, which is a dead particle, you put it into your immune system, so you awaken your immune system's natural processes, so it builds antibodies and, et cetera. But the problem is those vaccines weren't working that well because they weren't getting the proper immune response, so they started adding aluminum and mercury and other what are called adjuvants, which have other disastrous effects based on your body type. So here, what they're saying is we're going to inject in what's called the nucleic acid, essentially, particles, just like DNA particles, which will find its way into the cells, and it'll actually hamper the virus replication process. Okay, so it's a different kind of effort versus creating antibodies. It's actually stopped the replication process. Look, vaccines, by the way, they're saying they don't need to be tested. Vaccines were considered, Gary, is another class of interventions, not pharmaceuticals, not biomedical devices. They actually have a much lower threshold of safety testing. In fact, of the 30 vaccines recommended by the CDC for young kids, not one of them has been a saline placebo control tested. You'll find it's quite amazing. And in fact, the one that they said they did a test on the HPV Gardasil vaccine, it was a fraudulent test.
That doesn't surprise me, honestly. It doesn't surprise me. So what do you think is going to happen with this vaccine? Do you think they're going to roll it out? Do you think they're going to mandate it like they just passed that law in Denmark?
Yeah, so on Thursday of last week, by the way, Denmark is considered by the UN, per their Sustainable Development Goals, as one of as a country that epitomizes, next to Sweden, the hallmark of those goals. And on Thursdays, Denmark said that they can forcibly go into people's homes and vaccinate people with police, which means military. So, look, when you're developing things these fast, you don't know the side effect of these things. And what we're saying is, we don't care about the side effects. We need to get this vaccine out. So it's creating some very important precedents that Americans need to be concerned about. First, what's going to happen next year? Okay? Well, they're creating a condition basically saying, for medical fascism, saying, well, Gary, look what happened last year. You don't want to crash the economy, do you? We're going to have to vaccinate you. And forget the fact that we actually look at the immune system, that the immune system, the people who get harmed or it's not the virus that harms them. This is something that's fundamental, which I've been trying to harp on. Fauci, he's not talking about this. So we have an ignorant set of educated elites, and they're taking advantage of the American people, because what they're saying is there's this boogeyman called the virus, okay? And you need the vaccine to help you stop that, okay? Boogeyman, savior. Boogeyman, savior. Savior's Bill Gates, right? Clinton Global Initiative, etc. Big Pharma. And that's basically what this is, because if you actually understood the immune system, it's laughable. The reality is the immune system has evolved over billions of years. We grew up in bacteria and viruses. We're supposed to play out in dirt. That's how the immune system gets turned on. So what happens is it's people who have immunocompromised immune systems, which means their immune systems are not firing on all cylinders. So imagine you have 3 cylinders, it's only firing on 2. You know what happens? The 3rd cylinder has to take up all the effort, right? Well, that 3rd cylinder in immunology is called cytokines. It fires so hard that it overreacts, and it starts not only attacking the virus surface, but also starts attacking your own tissue, differentially based on the proteins of that virus. You follow what I'm saying? So it's your own body attacks itself because of a weakened and dysfunctional immune system. Well, how do you get a weakened and dysfunctional immune system? Well, eat crap all day, eat sugar all day, okay? Eat a diet that's no longer has any vitamin D and nutrients. In some ways, I was talking to one of my customers, I run a company called Cytosolve, which we help companies actually create great products with this technology. And he was saying, this is sort of Darwinian right now. The people for years who've been eating garbage, the people for years who've been victimized by dirty air, dirty water, dirty food, their immune systems are compromised. Now, look, also as you age, right? Your thyroid function goes down, your HCl levels go down, your vitamin A levels will get suppressed, right? And you don't get enough vitamin D, and nor is your body able to really do proper digestion, right? So what ends up happening in this entire process, you have weakened immune systems. We should have been calling, if they really cared, we should have been calling, for real emergencies for the fact that we have 20-30% obesity rate in this country, is that people's immune systems are shot. So instead of so we feed people garbage, dirty air, dirty water, dirty food, right? Across all establishment parties. And then when a virus hits, isn't it an amazing opportunity to really force the further narrative? You need pharmaceuticals and vaccines, when we don't want to address the underlying issue, which is immune health. And that's why I wrote that letter to the President of the United States. This is really about immune health. This is the fact that we don't get enough vitamin D, we don't get enough vitamin A, we don't get enough vitamin C. I mean, there's other things, but we can focus on those 3 things. In Chad, in African country of Chad and Djibouti, I forget how to pronounce it, there's only been 1 COVID case and only no deaths. Why is that? Well, because people live probably lives that we should probably think about living. They're out in the sun. They're, digging up roots. We may consider these people 3rd world, but we almost have to reconsider, what the hell does it mean to be in a first world country if we're filled with toxins, filled with these kinds of mandates? Our kids are eating garbage. When you eat high sugar diets, your body produces candida. It knocks down your, certain gliotoxins, which essentially knock down your macrophages and your T cells, 2 important cylinders in your immune system. So what we're doing is we're basically destroying the immune health of our people. So the solution is pretty simple. At least get out in the sun. If you can't do that, you got to boost up on vitamin D, vitamin D, vitamin D. Vitamin D, I'm going to be doing a video on this to explain this to people, literally creates through a set of pathways very interesting molecules, which are the fuel to your macrophages.
Well, I take vitamin D every day.
You got to do that. I mean, look, I can tell you what I would do. From the medical advice, everyone should go and talk to their doctors, but the problem is they don't know a lot. But 5 to 10,000 IUs is not a bad thing to do if you're not out in the sun all the time, which we're not daily.
Yeah, I take about 5 to 10,000 depending on the style. Either it's a droplet or it's a pill, and the pill has some probiotics built into it. Dr. Mayer Eisenstein was the one who turned me on to vitamin D years ago.
Who is that?
The late Dr. Mayer Eisenstein.
I said, look, where does vitamin A come from? The dark, rich vegetables and fruits, okay? And where does vitamin D come from? The sun. So it's like basic stuff. Fruits and vegetables, get some sun, okay? Well, if we're living in households where we're not getting sun, we're not getting fruits and vegetables, and we have a depleted culture for 25 years, and we have Monsanto, driven, food, which basically those pesticides affect the gut microbiome, which throw our gut off, and then we're eating high sugars. I mean, it's a recipe for death, but we're not addressing that. We're like hyping up this virus, fear-mongering it. And what is the result? You have people hiding out in homes, people getting ready to accept fascism, and people not addressing the fundamental issue, which is immune health.
Well, let's
If
talk
you want to
about
make our kids strong, it's immune health.
Let's talk about the team that the president has assembled, his team of experts, and they're already talking today, this morning. They're talking about, get ready, this is going to be seasonal. They're already conditioning the public to accept that. And as I'm driving through, or before the whole shutdown in Illinois here, driving through any Walgreens or Walmart parking lot, you see signs for flu vaccine and all these different things. I'm envisioning a time where we're going to see the same thing. Coronavirus vaccine is free for everyone today, right? So that's, I think, a future.
Well, it's going to be even more. It's going to even be more unfortunate than that. It'll be, oh, Gary, your driver's license is coming up for renewal. Did you get all your vaccines? You can't travel. Hey, you can't take the train or the bus. Hey, you can't go to the gym. You can't go here. This is where this is headed. A gym will say, well, we can't allow you in here, Gary. We don't want to harm all of our other people, right? Do you remember when, who was it? Michael Jordan played with the flu. People are like, wow, look at Michael. He's playing there with the flu. He's strong, right? Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
So what I'm saying is this entire thing is a master setup. It's chess move after chess move. And it's brought to you by Anthony Fauci.
Let's talk about Anthony Fauci for a second here, because he's a member of the team of experts and advisors who are guiding through this new territory. But now we're learning from the WikiLeaks drops that he is a huge supporter of Hillary Clinton, and somebody you have actually called destructive. Why should we be concerned with the advice that the president is getting from Fauci?
Anthony Fauci, in my view, should be indicted, okay? If people actually knew what this guy actually did, and if the president actually knew what he did, the problem is that the president, he fought the Russian collusion thing, he fought the impeachment thing, and this is the last real important, I think this is probably the most important fight that needs to be dealt with. Anthony Fauci, if you know his history, he's been with the government for nearly over, since Reagan times, 40, 50 years, okay? Fauci was a guy who was around since Reagan times, okay? And then Bush and Obama and all of the presidents up to here. How did he build his career? People should go look at his career. He built his career on the false narrative that HIV causes AIDS. Do you remember AIDS? The whole AIDS scare?
Oh, yeah. I was terrified when I was growing up learning about that.
He built his entire career on HIV causing AIDS. All right? Peter Duesberg, who I've spoken to, who was a truly great scientist, the youngest guy to get tenure at Berkeley, one of the youngest members of the National Academy of Sciences. Peter, won every award that NIH had to do. But when Peter said, wait a minute, there is no causal relationship between this virus, HIV, which he considered a very harmless virus, and AIDS, he was vilified, all of his grants went away. And the guy that promoted this lie was Fauci's predecessor by the name of Gallo, Robert Gallo. Robert Gallo was brought up on scientific misconduct charges. He literally stole the HIV virus from France. He couldn't produce enough of the virus because they couldn't find it, okay? He created a bogus HIV test. And the result was Fauci came to his rescue. I think there was a power play. Fauci essentially took the lead, Gala was put into the back, and that was the beginning of this guy's career. You know, he writes about how he hangs out with Bono and, you know, remember the whole AIDS and all the stupid celebrities getting involved in this nonsense, right?
Oh, yeah.
This was so Fauci, he's a veteran of this. This ain't his first rodeo. He learned how to create bogus science, to promote bogus science, to create the fear of HIV causes AIDS. Billions of dollars were spent on this. A lot of people died because people used drugs like AZT. I had a very good friend of mine who died from it. And, you know, people didn't learn HIV is frankly a harmless virus. Okay? The people who were dying from it were, again, immunocompromised. Gays at that time, you know, were having 1,500 partners. We're doing meth, amphetamines, all sorts of drugs. They were destroying their immune system. You had IV drug users who were destroying their immune system, and you had people getting blood transfusions, not because of the virus in the blood, but because they would get immunosuppressive drugs. The simple point here from a scientific standpoint is when you lower and you destroy the immune system. So Fauci doesn't want to talk about that. Everything is about the boogeyman of viruses, okay? It is the biggest fraud that's taking place. Fauci knows what he's doing. He's been doing this. He is the face of pharma and vaccines, and he sees his opportunity to become, you know, the hero in all of this.
Now,
that's what's going on.
Taking a step back here and looking at all the information you've just presented to me, the way I'm taking it in, and I'm comparing it to the information I've been ingesting over the past several weeks, the one big narrative that I've seen that's been presented is that, well, more people die from the flu. But there's this massive, terrifying visual of people being intubated and people eating bats and all this horrific
drama.
Visual propaganda. And now states are in lockdown mode. National Guard has been deployed. State guards have been deployed. Tents are being set up in cities and in Walmart parking lots and hospital parking lots. And you're having this spirit of fear descend on this country and the world at large. But compare this, why don't we do the same thing for the flu?
Well, it's a good question because people weren't adopting the flu vaccine as much as they thought, okay? And furthermore, the flu vaccine is very, very ineffective if you actually read the papers. So you have to understand, pharma and media work very closely together. Many years ago, you know, one of the companies I built, remember I told you in 1993, I had my second life with email, which was actually creating technology to handle inbound email. I originally did it for the Clinton White House. The White House was getting tons of inbound email. They ran a contest. I was a graduate student at MIT to automatically read and process emails. I ended up winning that contest, Gary, and I started a company called EchoMail, ECHOMAIL. By the way, the infrastructure which I'm contributing to the cause right now, where we are setting up teams of medical doctors, you know, MDs who actually practice nutritional medicine. So people send an email to corona@systemshealth, systemshealth.com. That goes through our technology, and it's secure, and people and the doctors are logging in and responding, okay, to give medical advice. But anyway, the point is that when I created that technology, I had many people starting to want to use this for analyzing email, okay? Because we would figure out the email, put together a response, and really lowered the cost of customer service. One of the companies that was very interested in knowing about this was one of the leading PR companies in the world called Burson Marsteller, okay? Big PR company. And I remember going out as a young kid, young entrepreneur, I was running my company, meeting with one of the senior executives. And this was over dinner, and he was openly boasting about how Burson helps companies in crisis management, okay? It's a big PR company, but their focus is crisis management. And he was saying that Eli Lilly, at that time, was having a major problem. Prozac sales were going down, okay? He was called in as the senior account strategist to help Eli Lilly boost his sales. And I said, well, what did you do? He goes, well, first I went to Eli Lilly, changed their branding. Hey, you're no longer a drug company. You help the world. I forget what the branding was. And he goes, second thing he goes, I had them do was spin out some nonprofit companies. One of the nonprofits, he said, was an organization which said, we need to protect battered women, okay? Obviously, right? Who wants to see women get battered? And that organization took out ads which was full page ads, which would, if you saw it in a newspaper, would say, is your husband beating you? Do you know if of someone, one of your friends, they targeted women, right? Whose husband is beating them. Make sure they're taking Prozac. So the reason I'm sharing this with you is, so they create a narrative of we're trying to help the distressed, right? And we are the drug company. We want to help all these darkies in Africa and India, etc. We need GMOs, okay? Gates is a savior, okay? These guys are very clever at spending millions of dollars to create the narratives of helping the quote unquote the oppressed, and then they will inject them with their pharmaceutical drugs. Forget the fact, and this is, you want to talk about racism, this is a racism coming from these liberal elites. These indigenous people actually knew how to take care of their health, okay? The Celts knew how to take care of their health. All of us who came from indigenous cultures, Italians, Indians, we all had our oregano, right, cumin. We knew how to eat food. Food is where we're supposed to get health. But they don't want to believe, they don't want us to believe in our grandmothers, our traditional cultures. They want to believe in this idiot, okay, Bill Gates, who, by the way, never created DOS, okay? He didn't write 50,000 lines of code I did. His mama and papa introduced him to people, and he went and bought someone else's DOS and flipped it, okay? But he's a Harvard dropout, and he was able to patent his stuff, so he gets to be a gazillionaire. You see what I'm saying? Or a Zuckerberg. Mm-hmm. So these guys have built false histories of their eminence in the technology field. They leverage it to say they're going to be saviors, and that savior solution is not food, is not, exercise activities. It's about injections into the bloodstream of people and to control them. That's what they're talking about. And every American needs to wake up that the lawyer lobbyists, the people I'm running against 3 lawyer lobbyists, I'm the only scientist or an inventor, a guy who works for a living. These lawyer lobbyists are the people who implement the desires of the deep state. That's what's going on. So what we're witnessing right before us should be a wake-up call to every person. I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, Independent. The issue of health goes beyond all those parties. And what you'll realize, all of those establishment parties want to hurt you and want to control you and want to make you they want to make you a little atomic unit where you become a revenue generator for people like Fauci's clan and these kind of people. And they practice fake science. And no academic at MIT, Harvard will say anything. You know why? Because they owe their grant money to people like Fauci. Because it's a cabal. If you say anything, you're out. That's what happened to Peter Duesberg, okay? Wow. So that's what we're dealing with. And unfortunately, the president, he may have good gut instincts, but he's not able to expose these people. And, I have had calls from very senior level economists all over the country saying, Shiva, I saw your videos. You need to keep doing them. The president is being bamboozled by this circle around him. And that's why I wrote that letter, Gary.
Let's talk about that letter now.
Viral. And everyone should get that letter. Everyone, it'll be up on our website. It may be up right now, but right on the Shiva for Senate website, we're putting a link to that letter. And that letter basically lays out in 4 pages very clearly what the problem is, that you have a fake science of the immune system. Here's the real science. And I actually proposed to the president a protocol, which is basically vitamin A, D, C, and some iodine. And I said, let's triage people into 4 groups. Those people COVID, let's put them in one group, right? Give them this protocol. Those people are immunocompromised, let's give them this group, right? Those people who are in critical care, let's give them, particularly IV vitamin C. And the 3rd group, who are healthy, let's give them some maintenance dose and get them back to work. That's what we should be doing, not one-size-fit-all medicine, right? This is treat everyone like, like they're basically part of the, some deep state party, right? We're just minions. So
it seems like, what they're providing here is a one-size-fits-all solution.
One-size-fits-all medicine. That's a form of medical fascism, right? What you need is different than what I need. Your genetics, your needs are very different than mine. And in fact, in 2003, when I went back to MIT to pursue my PhD, MIT created a new department called biological engineering, which I was one of the first early graduates. And one of the tenets at that time was personalized medicine, the right medicine for the right person at the right time. So people like Fauci aren't even practicing modern medicine. He's practicing outdated fake science medicine.
Wow, there he is.
It's criminal.
So you sent this letter.
Developed this whole shtick, you know, the little glasses, the little gray hair. These guys build their little shticks. And I've been around them, no different. You know, look, I was in Hollywood. I've been at MIT. They're not that different, okay? They're not that different. Particularly the people who are not that good scientists and like not that good actors, okay? They want to be celebrities and they want to be academics, very different than real actors or real scientists.
Now let's talk about
we have a preponderance of celebrities and we have a preponderance of academics, both who practice the oldest profession in the world right now, both of them, both sets of people.
Now you're currently running for Senate in Massachusetts as a Republican against Ed Markey, who's been endorsed by Elizabeth Warren. And now your campaign, we reported on this when you came out some time ago, touted a real Indian versus a fake Indian. I thought that was amazing. Are you willing to take a DNA test to prove your Indian heritage?
I did. I actually took a DNA test. You know, I sent 3 to Warren. I was the one who's, you know, Trump called her Pocahontas, but I was the one who took it all the way. She decided to take the DNA test because of me, because, Gary, you couldn't get out of Massachusetts. We had so many of these big 4x8 signs which said only the real Indian can defeat the fake Indian, picture of me and picture of Warren in her headdress. And that was, again, about the same issue, about integrity, about manipulating things, right? You know, Elizabeth Warren's trying to manipulate her biology, just like Fauci's trying to manipulate the understanding of the immune system. And he's relying on people's ignorance. Same thing with Elizabeth Warren, academic, et cetera. And if you think about Massachusetts, Massachusetts is really the epicenter of the deep state. That's what Massachusetts is. It's not Washington, D.C. All of the swamp, if you actually take the deep state, you can think about it. I have my microscope here, and you put a microscope, you go to 100x, and you go deeper and deeper zoom. Then you start seeing the swamp scum, right? You see the swamp, then you see the scum. And then if you go deeper, you find out the swamp scum, the connective tissue of the swamp scum is a bunch of lawyers and lobbyists, okay? Those are the connective tissue if you zoom in, you know? Wow. And that swamp scum comes in a 1 mile radius between MIT and Harvard, all of them. That's where they come. That's why winning in Massachusetts, my election, our election for U.S. Senate is no longer a U.S. Senate race for in Massachusetts. We have so many volunteers coming from below, a lot of mothers, women, and as well as from outside of Massachusetts, because they see this as an election for truth, freedom, and health. And they see someone like me who's actually one of them. They want one of them fighting for them, a working class kid who worked his butt off, not a Kennedy. You know, I'm running against 3 potential guys, right? Markey, who's the incumbent senator who's been in Congress for 50 years. People should start asking, what can you make? Can you make a piece of software? Can you build a bridge? Do you know how to fix nothing? Then, because they were afraid that I would beat him, they ran another dope, Joe Kennedy, okay? Again, a nice, guy who's a liberal aristocrat, $70,000 private schools for high school, gets into Harvard Law School, gets a nice DA job on the Cape where he can hang out with his family, hang out in the sun. And now he believes this is his inheritance, already has $50 million in inheritance, and God knows how he made that, right? He didn't. Everything I've earned, everything you've earned, most of us earn money for a living, right? These guys have no skills, nothing. And then when they knew that I'd probably beat him, Gary, they decided to run in some other moronic lawyer who's got like 100 Twitter followers, okay? In the GOP establishment. But the bottom line is this election in Massachusetts is really going to be the dialectic that represents what's going on in this country, a producer versus a parasites. Producers versus parasites. That's what we're looking at. Do we want to vote for producers, people who make stuff, or do we want to continue voting for parasites? And especially in a time of crisis like this, who do we want helping us? Look at who Trump's surrounded with. He's surrounded with vipers right now, total vipers.
Well, let's take a look at a clip from yesterday. Your opponent, Elizabeth Warren, blaming Senate Republicans for not passing a financial relief bill. Roll the tape.
Let's negotiate over the dollar.
Senator, we're up against the clock, so I have to keep jumping in, so forgive me. In this bill, there are checks for everyday Americans. The reason this bill hasn't gone through is because of Democratic senators. Do you want to be the person that's stopping people from getting their checks to meet their rent at the end of this month?
Excuse me, the reason this bill has not gone through is because of Republican senators and because of a Republican leadership that pretended to negotiate for 3 days with the Democrats, and then at the end of that time basically introduced their own bill that did not have compromises and that did not make sure that the money is going down to the grassroots.
So there was Elizabeth Warren. What is your reaction?
Look, in politics, one of the things I learned as a kid, because I was very interested in politics, Gary, I took it from a standpoint of physics and understanding, and I try to educate others. There are really three forces in any political situation. Two of them are against the people. Only one of them is for the people. One of the forces is the existing, overt, establishment, right? Openly out there to want to screw people, and everyone says, oh yeah, they're the establishment, right? And then you have everyday people on the ground who want to change things, and they may not do it perfectly. They may do it in very different ways. Like when the revolutionaries, we fought the colonialists, right? We didn't march in their nice little orders. We threw all sorts of stuff at them. We did guerrilla warfare, but that's the real change agents. But in between change agents and the establishment comes a third group, what I call the NSOE, the not so obvious establishment. It's almost like a force of nature. And the not so obvious establishment is created by the establishment that speaks the rhetoric of change, like Warren was just doing. I want to help the grassroots. They act as though they're for the people. When what they do is they exist to speak that rhetoric, to succor young people who want change into their vacuum, and they suck them back into the establishment. Controlled opposition, Gary. That's what Warren is all about. She talks about she cares for people, all of this and that, but ultimately what she cares about is strengthening state capitalism, crony capitalism, and you can see that in a very simple way. The way you can test these guys on it is they always want to do regulations, right? And ultimately, what you realize, regulations actually help the big guys. So she supported Dodd-Frank. Well, what did Dodd-Frank do? Dodd-Frank actually supported banking regulations, which only the big 4 or 5 of the big bankers could afford, and it destroyed nearly 2,000 to 3,000, 4,000 small banks. What makes America great, and hopefully will continue to, is the small banks. We have 12,000 small banks. You want to get a loan, you build a relationship with your local banker. You don't have to go to a behemoth bank like in other countries. So Elizabeth Warren's policy of regulatory policies help the big guys. Mark Zuckerberg right now wants to be regulated. You know why? Because he can keep out smaller Facebooks out, because only he can be able to afford regulatory policies. So Warren, it's a backhanded way of supporting the establishment. They always speak about regulations as though that's going to help everyday people. What it does, it actually increases cost, and it increases, and it's a way to keep out the small guys. So Elizabeth Warren is part and parcel of the establishment, and that's what she's about, period. And what you see in here is she's talking about the grassroots and et cetera. It's nonsense. She's a fake Indian. Always will be a fake Indian. And in fact, what the DNA test showed was when she took it, I sent her a DNA test kit, by the way. The idiot returned it. I tweeted it out, went viral on the internet. I got a lot of, I got a lot of great press out of that. We ran a DNA dance party for her, invited her to come around her home. She didn't show up. So anyway, but we had all these signs, and she finally takes a DNA test. And what does she do? She has to find someone to sprinkle in from Peruvian and some Mexican genes, even to get up to 1 out of 1024. So you're looking at someone who is the epitome of the academic elite, who thinks they can simply lie and cheat. That's what they do, and that's what Fauci is. Fauci and Warren are of the same ilk. They lie, they cheat, they move the goalposts all day long, and that's how they survive.
Let's talk about some of the things Elizabeth Warren and the rest of the Democrats believe need to be included in this CV relief bill. Okay, the first one, rather shocking. I mean, the laundry list that they've included is, it's ridiculous. No voter ID to get a ballot, and anonymous ballot harvesting. How does this correlate to the pandemic, and how would this affect your campaign, your race?
Well, I think there's another provision in the bill also for going cashless, right? To creating a digital cash for the...
Creating a digital currency, a digital US dollar. That's another point as well.
Yeah. What I believe is happening right now before our very eyes is the invisible enemy, quote unquote, coronavirus, right, is being exploited. And this is all very well planned to execute all the globalist, if you want to use that term, or imperialist agenda of the deep state. So you want to eliminate all borders. That's what essentially eliminating voter ID, IDs is. I mean, I was shocked. I never voted in my life because I didn't care for electoral politics. When Trump ran was the first time I voted because I liked the fact that he was a disruptor and he was going after both parties. And I remember going to vote. They didn't even ask for my ID. I said, you don't need my ID? They go, nope. So it was, you just walk in, you say where you live, and I found it quite incredible. Third world countries don't allow this, right? The so-called places where we think they do, there's cheating going on. Total opportunity for cheating. And that's what the deep state wants. And by the way, when I say deep state, some in the GOP establishment also want this, right? Because they're part of the Democratic elite party. These things like the cashless society, again, they're using the fact, oh my God, we don't want people passing viruses by touching cash, right? It's basically a pretext for essentially going to negative interest rates. They own our money. Nothing is tangible. Everything is tracked. Everything you use is monitored. It's basically the advance of top-down rule. So think about this. You're going to control people's bloodstreams, and then you're going to control every activity that they do. And the 5G issue, I've been asked, what do I think about from a health standpoint? I haven't had a chance to go into that, but I can tell you 5G is an opportunity to put cameras everywhere with AI, the same AI we gave to the Chinese to watch lip movements, so you can understand what people are saying. And so that's the future that we're looking at. It's not a future of innovation. It's a future of using technology to help head us into the dark ages. And that's why we need to start supporting, or fighting for open, free speech. Our campaign is truth, freedom, and health. And it seems like very simple, but I spent a lot of time, talking about this. Freedom means truthful free speech, right? Open discourse. It doesn't mean you attack someone, call them a fraud, and when you sue them, go crying because you said I didn't invent email when I did, and you try to attack me. I'm talking about truthful free speech. That's what the Constitution supports. Open discourse and debate, and that's the soil for real science, and from which we may uncover real truth. To identify, as this quote says, real problems so as to innovate real solutions for the health of our body, community, and the world. This was up before the coronavirus thing went up, Gary, but the fundamental issue is when you suppress free speech, you basically move to scientific consensus, not the scientific method. This is really important. You use the input of controlling speech. There's no more scientific method, which means you actually have to do experiments and find the hard thing of what's actually taking place. You create scientific consensus. With scientific consensus, you can create lies, and from which you can use to create a fake problem and a fake solution. Oh my God, CO2 is a pollutant, right? Fake problem. And you create a fake solution. We need to impose, carbon tax. Well, the real solution is we need to lower pollution, right? And the Paris Accords allows China to pollute, going from 11 billion carbon metric tons to 22. India gets to pollute. So so fake problem, fake solution. Fake problem. Oh my God, these viruses are going to kill us all. No, that's the fake problem. The real problem is we have immunocompromised people. The real solution is how do we beef up the immune health of people? Well, that means we have to attack corruption because these corrupt lawyer lobbies politicians are the ones who destroyed our air, water, and food. Okay? So they don't want to talk about that. They rather move this thing to a boogeyman, control you, quarantine you, vaccinate you. That's where we're headed. And this is what people need to wake up to. That's why I keep saying the son of poor farmers from India, the son of working class kids in New Jersey, which is what many of us are. We're working class people out here. We create stuff. And this election in Massachusetts, everyone listening should get behind it. Whether you give $1, $2, whether you want to donate to us, it's important. By the way, Gary, one of the things I shared, which is important, people go to my website and they click on that donate button. I hate taking money from people without giving something. It's just who I am. I just can't do it because I know people work so hard for their money like my parents did. So when people give us money, if they give 25 or more, I've created a book, an online ebook that teaches them the fundamentals of systems thinking, systems theory, so they can understand how their body is a system, everything is a system. And then I give them a tool that they can actually understand their particular body type, and they can figure out how foods and these kinds of things manipulate their bodies. So if you click on donate, you'll see it right there. If you go right to it, you'll see, and I want to talk about this, and if you scroll down, you'll see those are the things that I'm offering people. And these are things that, and it's right online, and so people can get it immediately. System and Revolution is a very powerful book. It was from my 40 years of research distilling how anyone can understand the principles of systems. And then they can use this tool to understand how their body is a system, how everyone is unique, and how foods and things can be used as inputs to support our body as a system. And I've embedded it into my campaign. The other idiots, the other lawyer lobbyists, they just call up people and ask for money, 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 right? That's all they do. They don't create anything. So we're at a point in this country, people have to wake up and say, do I want to put someone in there as one of me, who's going to protect and help create the future? Or do I want someone who's going to control me and control the future and deny me freedom, deny me truth, deny me health? It's very simple. This is a black and white choice. Do you want truth, freedom, and health, or do you want power, profit, and control? That's where we're at. And a lawyer and a lobbyist is not going to deliver that.
Now, there's other issues that the Democrats are attempting to inject into the relief legislation. Corporate pay statistics by race and race statistics for all corporate boards of companies receiving assistance. Bail out all current debt of the Postal Service. For companies accepting assistance, 1/3 of the board members must be chosen by workers, a full offset of airline emissions by 2025, greenhouse gas statistics for individual flights, and then permanent paid leave at companies receiving assistance. Will you please help me and our viewers understand the correlation between these issues and the CV relief package for the American people?
Well, from the Democrat standpoint, Gary, it's all in alignment, right? Because this fear mongering, as I said in that tweet, that's why I think it went so viral, because it hit the heart of this issue. And everything I said in that very potent tweet is coming true. The deep state, which is the right terminology to use here, has always wanted to consolidate power, profit, and control. So they created this fear. Everyone's quarantined, right? The economy is, essentially they have the economy by, the short hairs. And the entire goal here is to use this framework, use this opportunity to put everything in, right? Throw everything in that they wanted, right? Carbon tax, right? If they truly want to control, what they're talking about is nationalization of companies, okay? This isn't even classic, quote unquote, if you read Marx never even talked about this, okay? In fact, Engels and Marx said that the worst people were the Marxists. And if you actually read Das Kapital, which people should at some point read, it's so different than what's actually being practiced here by any means. The Marxists are the ones who have taken away all the freedom in many ways, because what they're talking about is creating a mammoth state. They're talking about the state merging with the heads of industry. This is China 2.0. In many ways, Gary, what I feel is going on is I feel China, we're going to become a colony of China. And made in China means the essence of China is being exported here. What is China? China is basically state capitalist. It's you take all the Fortune 1000 leaders of the Fortune 1000 and you merge them with the government. It's nationalization. That isn't workers' control. That's not workers' control. It's a fake version of workers' control. It's fake workers' power. If you want real workers' power, it's bottoms up. You decentralize things to the edges, not you centralize things to top-down control where the government controls things. It's not even anything supporting workers. I've read this stuff. People should go read some parts of Marx. Marx talked about something called the lumpen proletariats. Do you know who they are, Gary? They're not workers. They're the people who sit on the sideline, collect welfare checks, are criminals, don't do any work. And he distinguished that between people who actually produce value and the proletariats. The Marxists have elevated the lumpen proletariats to mean workers. That's what's happened. The people who do nothing, produce nothing, including themselves, including these politicians, the lawyers, lobbyists, that's who they want to fund. So if they want to, you know what I think they should do, Gary? Here's my advice to them. Why don't they apply this concept to universities? Why don't they start with Elizabeth Warren's university, Harvard University? Okay? Why don't they start with MIT and Yale and Stanford? Why don't we have the students running those universities? Why don't we have in Cambridge the citizens whose properties MIT and Harvard stole? You know, Harvard and MIT do not pay any property tax. They're $50 billion hedge funds. Okay? We don't see them talking about those entities, because those entities are the entities which is the ones coming up with these idiotic ideas.
Wow. You have downloaded so much information into my brain, and we are on the same page in so many ways. I know that this interview is going to go viral, much like a lot of your other work has, because we've touched on so many points here that are critical to this very moment in American history. And I mean, we've been going on for, I think, over 80 minutes now. This was supposed to be a 30-minute interview, but I'm really happy that we were able to give you a platform here to present these ideas. We're going to make this thing viral. Everyone watching right now, please make sure you go to the website. It's on the screen, shiva4senate.com. There's also links down below to all of Dr. Shiva's social properties. I want to make sure you follow him and follow his work. Dr. Shiva, before we go, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I can distill if people want to understand everything I've talked about it and to keep it simple. If you can take a piece of paper and draw a triangle, everyone just draw a triangle, okay? You know,
I'm going to draw a triangle right now.
If you want to do this is how you can distill, because, you know, one of the things I learned from one of my third grade teachers is, great teacher, Mrs. Hall, you know, and another good professor at MIT was, the academics try to make things so complicated, Gary, right? The essence, and to me, when I feel I've done something really good, like a piece of art, by the way, I have a degree in art and design, is when you remove all the BS and you distill it down to something that is so simple, but without losing the complexity. So this triangle that I'm going to talk with you will give you a way to really understand all of this that I've shared in a global, and in many ways, it's a law. It's a physical way of understanding. So if you draw this triangle over here, if you draw, put in one corner freedom, okay? On the bottom left, put a little ball there and put freedom. On the top of it, put truth. And the bottom right, if you put health, okay? Now, all of these things are connected. So let me explain. So you need freedom to get to truth. And with truth is how we get to health, be it not only of our body, our economy, anything. And it's from health we are strong to fight for freedom. Let me repeat that. It is from freedom that we can unravel truth. And it is from truth we can figure out the health for our bodies, our infrastructure, our society. And it's only when we're healthy do we have the warrior spirit to go fight for our freedom, okay? So truth, freedom, and health. Freedom, okay? You try to lock people up. You try to control dissent. You try to give false narratives. You move everything to scientific consensus away from the scientific method, which is happening right now. That's why that guy went and hit me, what you showed originally, Gary, right? Because I was saying something he didn't want to hear. And then by that, you suffocate truth. And when you suffocate truth, you basically create fake problems and fake solutions. On everything we're seeing today, gun violence, oh my God, guns kill people. No, it's not true. If you take a systems approach, you find out it's not the guns. There are many factors which kill. And if we address those other things, you don't have to create the dialectic between pro and Second Amendment, right? And a very good research paper came out on this. Well, if we want to really help the environment, let's lower pollution. Let's get rid of companies like Monsanto who pollute the water, et cetera. But you don't want to do that. You want to talk about vaccines. You want to talk about, viruses all day, right? Or you want to talk about CO2 being a pollutant. So we suffocate freedom. We have fake scientists, fake academics who create fake solutions, which actually harm our health. Vaccines, Ritalin, all this stuff, which hurt our brain, which hurt our body. So we get, telling everyone that cannabis is good for everyone. It's not true. Okay.
Well, you look at, just the pharmaceutical commercials alone, all the side effects. They have this nice guy running through the forest and he's smiling and he's happy. But the narrator says, oh, yeah, by the way, you could die if you take this.
Right. And what happens is this phenomenon pollutes everything. So you take even good things that were originally, let's say, cannabis, which was farmed, which had very low levels of THC. You hybridize them, you build it to 25 times more THC than what it had. And now you start creating young men and women who lose their gumption to fight anymore, okay? You create an unhealthy society in all levels. So now you have unhealthy people who don't want to fight, and now they are ready to get free stuff. They are ready to be a little automaton on a broad machine, and they're not ready to fight. But the important thing is working people. People work with their hands, plumbers, electricians, in fact, surgeons. I've got thousands of letters and emails coming in since I put that out. What I find this amazing thing is the people who call me and get it are all people who do something with their hands, or they actually create something. The typical MD doesn't really make something anymore, okay? The typical lawyer doesn't make anything. Someone who's studying some, gender studies of aardvarks is really not learning much, okay? But people who make something, okay, who create something, have skills, they're really our future, because they get the climate change was, the CO2 hoax, okay? They get this whole thing's a hoax. They're the people who get it. So the opportunity that we have is those people, and I think right now, as I appreciate you letting people know about our campaign, the Shiva for Senate campaign, it's our campaign, it's your campaign. By winning here, it'll be like taking a stake and plunging it right into the vampire or the deep state. It'll be a big victory for all of us. And that's why we all need to get behind what's going on here and all the amazing volunteers that are coming out from all parts of the country to help our campaign. This will be a huge victory for all of us.
Well, we definitely need you in the Senate, and everyone who's watching right now, the link again is on the screen and you can see it, Shiva for Senate. All the links to Dr. Shiva's social media are in the description. So I encourage everyone watching, follow and support Dr. Shiva's campaign right now. There is no question we need to increase our strength in the Senate with liberty-minded candidates and not career politicians like Pocahontas Warren. Dr. Shiva, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. I would love to have you back to update us on other issues. Right now, we're in the middle of this national emergency, and you're enlightening our viewership with so much information. But I also want to extend an open invitation to join me and my wife in studio the next time that you are in Chicago.
That'd be great. I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much. That sounds great, Gary. And best to you and your whole team. Thanks for the great work you're doing, getting this kind of news out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. Now, friends watching right now, I want you to hit the links below. And if this interview inspired you, I want you to consider sharing it right now across all of your social networks. As always, we will continue the discussion in the comment section below, and that's where we'll see you next time. For the Next News Network and Dr. Shiva, I'm Gary Franchi. Thanks for watching the Next News Network. Tap here to subscribe to the channel to get the latest news and alerts. Tap here to watch our latest breaking news and our top stories. Tap here for our latest featured interviews. And make sure you tap here to get in on the new podcast, the G-Cast, with my wife Angie and I. We'll see you at the next report. For the Next News Network, I'm Gary Franchi. Fauci, Dr. Birx, Bill Gates, and the World Health Organization COVID-19 Endgame. Yes, welcome back to the Next News Network. I'm Gary Franchi. Now, before we get started, go ahead and tap the red subscribe button down below for more groundbreaking interviews like the one you are about to witness. Then I want you to do this. Hit the share button so that you can participate in the viral tidal wave and help wake up America. Now, I do need to remind our viewers that the information presented here is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease and has not been evaluated by the FDA. So please consult your physician before starting any medical regimen. Now, the last time we had Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai on the Next News Network, he exposed everything that the deep state is trying to hide about the coronavirus. The interview went mega viral. Now, if you don't know Dr. Shiva, he specializes in finding solutions through a biological engineering systems approach, or in very simple terms, what he does is eliminate the need for animal testing by replicating those same processes on the computer. Now, over the last weeks and months, Dr. Shiva has been focused on the science as well as the fake science and claims made by the World Health Organization, supported by Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, who are, now we're learning, have ties to the deep state, the Clinton Foundation, as well as the Gates Foundation. So it's clear to see now that their exaggerated pandemic projection numbers, which they have consistently lowered, okay, the original numbers, willfully promoted by the corporate-approved media, led to a panic-driven, disastrous global economic collapse. And today, we're happy to have him back to update us on his latest research and the real agenda that is being pushed through what he calls the greatest fraud on America to manipulate the economy, suppress dissent, and push mandated medicine. Dr. Shiva, welcome back to the show. Let's get straight into it. Bring us up to speed from when we spoke last and tell our audience about your latest findings.
Sure. Great to be here, Gary. I think there's two findings. You know, what's going on, Gary, is we have the intersection of the issues of health and science along with politics. So it's a fascinating world we're in. And I feel, frankly, very, very honored to be able to share the knowledge that I was fortunate to be able to acquire through my education here in the United States and, you know, growing up in Jersey, et cetera, which I've shared about before. But the key things are there's two events taking on. You have the political aspect, which, you know, I talked about in that tweet, you know, really, I think that tweet really brought up those three aspects, right? This entire fear mongering is really the essence of it is to suppress dissent, right? The second part of it is to crash the economy. And the third part of it is to push mandated medicine. And I still stand by that. And what we've seen since that tweet came out is essentially, you know, everyone showing their cards. That's what's really happening. So let's talk about Fauci. You know, since we spoke, we ran a campaign to fire Fauci. And I frankly believe this individual should be indicted and should be fired, and all sorts of charges should be leveled at him because he's essentially been the mastermind of an organization for many, many years across many, many presidents, which has promoted a fake science that the immune system is so weak and that you always characterize some virus as a cause of destruction to the immune system. He did this with HIV and AIDS. And so this is his, you know, probably second or third rodeo. And the goal here is to scare everyone with a fake science understanding that as though the immune system gets attacked by the virus, right? So one of the things we did was we called for his firing and his indictment. And I think close to 40,000 people in a few days signed that petition. I would say we probably have close to 2,000 doctors now, Gary, across the world, because the doctors themselves are recognizing that they are victims of a big pharma medical education system. Look, there are many doctors, you know, some people I know, you know, in related family who go into medicine, they have a noble cause to do it. But the reality is the entire medical education process is not an education process that is focused on teaching people how to heal themselves, right? It's not a process that teaches the physician how to treat the body as a system. It's not a process that teaches the physician how to use nutrition, as you know, Hippocrates said, food is medicine. So all of that gets thrown out the window. And after they come out of medical school, what they are, unfortunately, is most of them are automatons. I'm not talking about the surgeons and the anesthesiologists. Those guys are like plumbers and electricians. They actually have to go in there and solve a problem. But fundamentally, the typical physician, they come out there as automatons. If this, do this. If this, do this. And they have golden handcuffs that if they don't do that, they're liable and the boards own and control them. You could almost say they're, you know, carbon-based automatons, okay? And at one point, it'll probably be easy to replace them. There's a growing movement of physicians who are recognizing that. Now, if you look at a guy like Fauci, I believe he's on the leadership council of the Gates Foundation. He loves the Clintons, and his relationship through the NIH and the CDC and the WHO is this triangle, which, by the way, the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese CDC is part of. The NIH of the United States funded, even as early as 2 or 3 years ago, $14 million to the Chinese CDC. So the entire cabal here is not about health. It's not about understanding how we boost people's immune systems. In many of the videos I put out, the immune system from a very fundamental system standpoint is our operating system. Above that, all the quote unquote apps run, right? If your operating system is dysfunctional, everything else falls apart and you get what we call disease. But fundamentally, the immune system is the guts of our health and well-being. So in this entire discourse, that is not what Fauci's been talking about. That's not what the FDA's been talking about. That's not what the WHO's been talking about. That's not what the CDC's been talking about. In fact, you have the Gates, you have Zuckerberg, and you have the Clinton Global Initiative, who are all about vaccines, vaccines, vaccines. So their entire opportunity is, we talked about early, and the trajectory of which, I characterized early on is the entire purpose of this is to scare, the Jesus out of everyone. So then when next year comes, or even September, October of this year, when the flu season comes, people basically blindly say, yeah, chip me up. Yes, I'll accept the vaccine card. Yes, I'll have to get vaccinated before I get my driver's license. I'm willing to, show my little vaccine card before I go to the gym. Total control. And
well, what you're talking about is exactly what Bill Gates had brought up in a TED Talk just recently, where he spoke about having a digital certificate. And what's odd is that TED Talks actually edited out a critical sentence where he admitted that point. What are your thoughts on that biometric or that certificate?
I know the guy runs the TED Talks. The TED Talks will never have a guy like me on. It's basically, it's for your, basic people who the TED Talks at one time had a little more interest to them, but now they're very, very organized, very, very, in many ways engineered, right, to get a certain response. When you give these TED Talks, they make sure that you're following a particular script. So they basically can take anyone, put them through the TED Talk manufacturing engine, and you get a TED Talk out of it. But fundamentally, if you look at Bill Gates, first of all, he's not trained in anything in biological engineering. If you look at his history of innovation, he didn't create DOS. He actually bought it from someone, and then he sold it. And then he always was a little bit concerned that he never had good PR. So what he's done over the last 20 years is to try to recharacterize himself and build his legacy as the savior. The neo-missionary is going to go and help all the dark people in Africa and India, etc. Right? That's the way he's positioned himself. But the fundamental of the Gates Foundation or the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation or the Clinton Global Initiative is what they're fundamentally doing is they're taking vast amounts of public resources, which, by the way, they should be paying taxes on, and essentially evading taxes and through very quote unquote legal means to create these family foundations. And then they use amazing PR to tell all of us how great they are, how they're going to donate their money to these foundations. When what they're really building, Gary, is their own government, okay? It's their own government run by a 0.0001% of people that they put their money there, they evade taxes, and then they're going to tell us what's good for us, right? They're going to determine policy through these extra governmental type organizations. That's what Gates, Zuckerberg, and the Clintons are involved in. Fauci is wired right into them, and then you have the WHO and the CDC. So if you look at that little graphic we put out, with Fauci in the center, with those graphics, and obviously Big Pharma is a big part of their OS. The entire goal is to consolidate power. And what we've seen over the last unfortunate 3 months is it's a psychological exercise to see how much they can manipulate people so they concede power to them. That's what's fundamentally going on.
Now, Trump, President Trump indicated this week that, talking about when you pull back this big globalist scheme that's happening, and you talk about these different organizations, foundations, all coming together to create this sort of shadow government, if you will. Now, we're talking about also the World Health Organization. The president this week indicated that he was either putting a hold or looking at putting a hold on funding to the World Health Organization, stating that when they call every shot wrong, he said that's no good. So the president's taking a look at this because the World Health Organization calling the wrong shots. What's going on here? What are your thoughts?
Well, look, the World Health Organization, if you look at the organization, one of the big organizations that works with them closely is the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association. I believe, I don't know the exact acronym, IPFMA, okay? that organization's executive, committee is led by Eli Lilly. It's led by Shinogi, one of the big Japanese pharmaceutical companies, and Roche. All of which Roche's stock has gone up as recently because of their announcement that they're going to come up with some vaccine. But you basically have, as we talked about last time, the utopia of the Sustainable Development Goals, that they promoted this utopia about 3 years ago, that we're going to have this amazing world where there's going to be income inequality, there's not going to be any poverty, etc. And the way we get to that utopia is through vaccinating everyone. It's called No One Will Be Left Behind. It's the title on the cover, through their IA 2030, Immunization 2030. So the goal is, and by the way, this is classic pharma. You promote a major problem, the fear that everyone's going to die from infectious disease, and then you promote their solution, which is we can get to this utopia. And the way we get there to those 17 Sustainable Development Goals is through vaccinating everyone. So this is out in black and white or color, whatever format you want to read it. And the institutions behind this are the WHO, the CDC, Big Pharma, Gates, Chan Zuckerberg, the Clinton Global Initiative, and essentially Fauci is their frontman. So since we last spoke, we've been hammering on that. We put out a call to fire Fauci. 40,000 people have now signed up, which really shows, and this is global, people are not stupid. By the way, in the same time, Gary, Fauci had his fans put out a petition so he could become the sexiest man alive on People magazine.
Oh my
goodness. In 10 days, he only had about 10,000 votes. In 2 days, 40,000 people signed up for this petition. People are not stupid. I think what people have wanted is, their gut instincts get something's wrong. And I think the videos we've been sharing, putting out there, are giving people the technical base to understand why. And one of those technical bases is, what is the immune system? So since we last spoke, we've put out a number of much more detailed videos on how the immune system works, but particularly using CytoSolve, we've started looking at what we call mechanisms of action to further give people some knowledge and education on how these mechanisms work. So for example, we did a very powerful educational training session on how vitamin D works. And before I go there, one of the things we want to understand is, in this entire discourse, at the senior most levels across mainstream media, be it Tucker Carlson or whoever the hell it is, right? By the way, Tucker is basically following what we're saying, right? Since we did our videos, now he's saying he's against Fauci, okay? But he basically is an opportunist. The mainstream media, they just want eyeballs. So they see, which way? Oh, Shiva's getting a lot of views here. Let's follow that, because they don't want to lose their Trump audience, okay? But it's not about anything sincere. But the reality, what we see is that none of them will ever talk about the power of vitamin D or the power of vitamin A or the power of vitamin C. And God forbid they'll ever talk about immune health. How do you juice up the immune system? Because that core foundational understanding, which is the real science, is that we live in a sea of microbes. I mean, there's 30 trillion microbes inside of me. There's 30 trillion viruses. There's about 60 trillion bacteria among my only 6 trillion cells. I'm a germ farm, okay? And around me is a germ farm, but I'm not dying. You're not dying. Most people don't die. The people that do die are the people who have a compromised immune system, have a significantly compromised immune system. Now that happens naturally as people age, the elderly, and there's things that they can do to boost up their immune system. It happens to those who don't take care of their health. It happens to those who have pre-existing conditions, and we've talked about it. In the letter I wrote to the president, I laid out, a very clear understanding of 4 different of these groups: people who have COVID-19, the people who are immunosuppressed, the people who are in critical care, and the healthy people. And I proposed a way that how you, in a personalized way, support those people with vitamin D and vitamin A and vitamin C and iodine, and you get the economy back to work. There's no reason to do this quarantining and this quote unquote flattening the curve and social distancing as the only way to solve it. But however, what you have Fauci doing and what you have the mainstream media doing is they're going to promote this narrative that, first of all, remember, their numbers were like millions of people dying. Then it went to hundreds of thousands.
Right, and I want to bring that up because as each day goes by, the original pandemic numbers are dramatically cut. Now, is this because their projections were way off or because their mitigation strategies were effective?
Well, I would argue it was a lot of people are watching our videos, millions of people, and they're probably taking vitamin D and A and et cetera, okay? If you really want to understand. But the more, I think that the reality is that if you look at it broadly, there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, there's a massive propaganda campaign. The goal is to say in June, let's give Fauci the Nobel Prize in Medicine, and Bricks, or whatever her name is, they're the ones who convinced the president to do social distancing. They're the ones who did quarantining, and we flattened the curve and we won. And by the way, the vaccine's here, okay? That's the propaganda model that they're doing. The reality is the sun's going to come out in a couple of months, pretty strong, okay? Vitamin D. That's what the reality is going to be, but that will be shoved under the rug. The realities are numbers are not making any sense, and they're cooking the books. So how are they cooking the books? They're doing two things. First of all, they're taking the WHO is the organization that creates what are called the diagnostic codes. In the United States, the AMA creates what's called the procedural codes. So if you go into a doctor's office and they assess you, the diagnostic codes are coming from the WHO, actual codes on what your diagnosis is. So what the WHO recommended was they would have two codes. One code would be you actually were diagnosed with COVID. You got the antibody test, or you did the PCR test, which by the way has a lot of false positives, and you have COVID positively. The other one was a very fluffy code, which is, well, it sort of feels and looks like COVID. We see some, shortness of breath, or they're coughing, whatever that is. So those two codes, in a letter, which I was able to, someone shared with me, a senior official at a hospital, a pediatrician, the CDC sent a letter out about a couple of weeks ago to hospital administrators all over the country, telling them to purposefully merge those codes, okay? What that means is you come in, I give you an example. One of our friends, her husband was a smoker for 20 to 30 years. Always, whenever flu season came, he's an elderly gentleman, a gentleman in his late 70s. He was going to the hospital and getting intubated, et cetera, with pneumonia. Well, this time, same thing occurs. He goes in. Guess what? If anything happens to him, Gary, they're going to give him that COVID-19 label. No one will remember the fact he was a smoker, that he had horrible health, et cetera. That will all be forgotten. And the hospital administrators are being encouraged to anything that looks or feels or smells like that symptom, which is the second code, to put it into the first code. In fact, a number of my friends are physicians. Even after someone dies, the physicians are being told to say, well, did he have COVID-like symptoms? Even though the test doesn't come back, sometimes it takes 14 days. They're putting COVID-19 into the diagnosis systems.
So let me ask you this: is this because they had such high projected numbers, 100, 200,000 deaths, so many people infected, that they're reaching into every single medical diagnosis of someone dying, and then they're applying COVID-19 so that they can inflate these numbers, so that when they look back, they're going to go, when we come back out of this thing, we all look back and go, wait a minute, oh, look at those numbers. Yeah, we were right. But they're inflating them. Do you believe that to be true?
Yeah, they are. If you are using these codes and you're giving people not a definitive metric, it's a very easy opportunity to, manipulate those numbers. And you have to understand, there's a whole incentive process. In hospitals, the hospital administrators run these organizations, and they have to deliver profit. That's how they're measured. The hospital administrators, remember, there are people called GPOs and PBMs, group purchasing organizations, and PBMs, who drive all the supply chain into those hospitals, who are the middlemen. So there are incentives for tagging certain protocols, certain diagnosis, and most of that is so opaque, a lot of us can't even get access to that. But what I'm trying to say, Gary, there's an incentive under conditions by the hospital administrators to put things as COVID-19. It's separate, and by the way, one of the things that people need to understand is you're seeing, remember this, we're still in flu season, right? There's people, tens of thousands of people are dying of the flu. Well, guess what? The flu numbers are going down, okay? Interestingly, proportionately. So we're basically, I would argue, we need to do an investigation. We're cannibalizing from those flu numbers to beef up the COVID-19 numbers.
So what you're saying is they are, in fact, taking from other diagnoses. So if you have the flu, now the flu numbers are going down because everyone's going over to the COVID-19 numbers.
Yeah, because there is an
Unreal.
actual code.
Wow.
And there are two codes. They made a fluffy code version of it and a real code version of it. I'll give you an idea in Italy, 38-40% of the people are over the age of 65. Guy comes in with a chest pain, COVID-19, okay? So that's one of the important things that we have to understand, that the books are being cooked because they need the narrative that, remember, the big game here is not now, it's 6 months from now, 9 months from now. We must have mandatory vaccines, and pharma is our gateway to all solutions. So I'd like to
go ahead.
I'd like to, having said that, talk about some of those categories and really enlighten people into the reality of how these people don't give a damn about people's lives. So let's talk about the critically ill. So, I did a video yesterday really sharing how the alveolus works, right? So let's remember there's 4 groups. Someone who just has a COVID, someone, they've decided they have COVID-19, right? Antibody test or the PCR test. That's one group. There's another group of the immunocompromised, but there's even a more important group that we're right in the hospitals right now. Which are those people? Those are the people that are critically ill, Gary. Critically ill. And if you saw the U.S. News report that came out yesterday, they said most of those people on ventilators, which means most meaning 95%, are going to die. Okay? So why? The reality is, let's go back to fundamental science, which Gates Foundation is not talking about, which Fauci is not talking about, and in fact, the pharma sharks swimming around Trump are not talking about. Let's go to very, very simple physics. So these people who are critically ill, well, how do they get there? Well, first principles, they have compromised immune systems 99% of the time. All right? Something happened to their immune system, and guess what happens? If you remember, if you're not firing on all 6 cylinders or 8 cylinders of the immune system, one cylinder overreacts, which is the cytokine storm. Your macrophages aren't doing their job. Your T cells aren't doing their job. They're compromised. So you have TNF alpha, IL-1 beta. Just to keep it simple, these are cytokines. It's another artillery or another machinery that overreacts, and it starts attacking your own lung tissue. All right? I hope that's clear. So that overreaction takes place. Well, that's called a cytokine storm. So if you take the bubble of the alveolus, I'm looking at one little beautiful balloon in the lungs where air comes in, oxygen, your capillaries exchange that oxygen, the CO2 for oxygen, and then you get fresh blood flowing into your body, right? That gas exchange is occurring in that alveolus. Well, guess what happens when you have a cytokine storm? That poor little alveolus, which is a beautiful little alveolus, starts filling up with edema, which, think about it's filling up with fluid. All right? Now, you put people on a ventilator. So just think about it. You got a little balloon here filled with water, okay, half water. If you go to basic physics, if people don't remember, there's a law called Boyle's law. Pressure is inversely proportional to volume, okay? So if you reduce the volume, what goes up? Pressure goes up, right? So now you're taking people and you're putting them on these ventilators, high pressure ventilators. When their body is already undergoing a cytokine storm, it's being filled up with fluid. And what are you doing? You're sending more high pressure in there. And fundamentally, what's happening is you are exacerbating this cytokine storm. You're causing more damage. You're literally popping off iron groups. Iron, every red blood cell has hemoglobin groups, hemoglobin attached to iron, and you're oxidizing, you're creating further what's called oxidative stress. I'll be doing a video discussing this more, but fundamentally these ventilators are killing people, particularly the critically ill. But it's a monetary, huge economic opportunity for the hospital administrators. Every ventilator they get in, Gary, is money, right? Now they created high demand, higher price. Simple solution, and this is what's criminal. Vitamin C, IV vitamin C. And what I'm talking about is not even, medical advice. People should just go in the literature. Hundreds of papers, hundreds of systematic reviews, even JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, which is really a peer-reviewed journal for big pharma, even they conservatively admit that when you give IV vitamin C, and you have to give it in high dosage so it has a therapeutic effect, even at the lowest levels, 15 to 30 milligrams, every 6 hours. Grams basically every 6 hours. In my letter to the president, I said we should give about 100 grams to have that therapeutic effect over, 24 hours. Amazing effect, because what does vitamin C do? Vitamin C really has 3 properties, okay? It's a powerful anti-inflammatory. It's a powerful antioxidant. In that unfortunate cytokine storm, a lot of oxidative species are being created. And you know what vitamin C does? It goes and eats them all up. It also modulates the immune system. It has an amazing power to go modulate chemical processes at the cellular level. So it stops that cytokine storm. So it's stopping the cytokine storm. It's taking out the reactive oxygen species, which oxidize the system. And furthermore, it's an antiviral. It's an antiviral, Gary. It actually stops RNA replication, and the transport of the virus out. So why aren't we doing this? This is a question everyone listening to this broadcast should be thinking. What is going on in this country?
Well, does this take us back to the Gates Foundation, to the push for vaccines?
Yeah, because they don't want people being healed. Everything has to be the V in vaccine, not the V in vitamins, right? They want the V in vaccines because the entire goal here is to mandate vaccines. And why is that important? Why is that fundamentally important? I wrote a book that's up there called The Future of Email. I created the first email systems I talked about when I was a kid. Many years later, I also created a technology to analyze email and route it to solve the issue of email management. So many of the biggest corporations in the world, Gary, use my technology to watch what people are saying, understand them, and then market to them, right? But one of the things I learned was technologies like this can be used for observability and controllability. With companies like Amazon, with 200 million cameras China has out there, we want to use 5G to make this a surveillance state completely. We have the ability to gather lots of data, which is the observation. Okay, here are the dissenters. These are the troublemakers over here, right? These are the people who fall in line. And then you have the ability, so now you know what the target groups are, what marketing does, right? These are the older people, these are the younger women, I'll sell them this kind of purse, that kind of purse. That same technology can be used to send out to control people. Well, the larger goal here is to create a large-scale factory of automatons. And I think the elites are thinking this, well, do I replace this with silicon-based robots? They're easily controllable, right? Program them and eliminate large parts of the population. Or they probably did a recalculation. Wow, silicon-based robots, that's very expensive, okay? Why don't I take my carbon-based creatures and automate them? You see what I'm saying?
Wow.
Control them. Well, one of the important ways to control them is you must control the bloodstream. You must control our health because it's a last oasis of what we have. So as a part of doing that is, remember, it's control, controllability, and observability. Once you can do that, with all the amazing technologies that exist today, massive ability to do massive supercomputers which can do calculations, computers which can do control systems, to manipulate what you see, what you get. You have an amazing, or the state has an amazing opportunity to make trillions by deciding, oh, Gary likes this, on the mundane level, Gary likes, to eat hamburgers, let me sell him some buns, right? Or if you go in, many of the marketing organizations know this, if a guy goes to buy diapers, if they always put beer next to it, because guys always like to pick up the beer. I mean, P&G and companies like Information Resources, I used to be in the data analytics space, know this, okay? So the fundamental goal is to create a monolithic top-down system, AKA China, right? State capitalism, crony capitalism, top-down, not entrepreneurial innovation coming from bottoms up. Consolidate science, consolidate innovation, consolidate health into one imperial global state. That's what the foundation of what's going on right now.
Wow.
And so this process is a vehicle to get there. So therefore, they cannot ever talk about vitamins. They
Dr.
cannot
Fauci,
ever talk about things that are pennies.
This is incredible stuff here, and we really want this information to get out on a very, very wide scale. And we do rely on our viewers to share this message because the mainstream media is doing their best to cover it up. So everyone watching right now, please share this link out to your various social media platforms. Tweet this link at Real Donald Trump. to the president himself using the hashtag Expose WHO, Expose Bill Gates. Very important. Now, before you go, Dr. Fauci, we want to remind our viewers that
Dr.
you are...
Shiva.
I called you Dr. Fauci. Dr. Shiva, before you go, we do want to remind our viewers that you are running for a Senate seat in Massachusetts on the platform of Truth, Freedom, and Health. So all of our viewers, if you would like to support Dr. Shiva, we encourage you to go to the website shiva4senate.com. That's Shiva with the number 4 and Senate. Okay, it's on the screen and it will be in the description along with all of the links to the rest of Dr. Shiva's social media platforms. Thank you so much for joining us. Wealth of information. And we want to have you back on again with an update. So I know you've got a very busy schedule ahead of you, and it's always a pleasure to have you on. We look forward to having you back.
Gary, one thing, if we have 1 minute left, one of the most important things is we get on the ballot. The GOP establishment and the Democrat establishment does not want to get on the ballot. So everyone listening out there, if you go to the website Shiva for Senate and you scroll down, you'll see a link there which says to get me on the ballot. Because of all this COVID stuff, Gary, it's very difficult to collect signatures. So what we're doing is, if you know people in Massachusetts or you're from Massachusetts, click on that link right there. And if you click on it, put in your name, your address, etc., and we will mail you. It's very expensive for us, all the forms and all the stamps so you can submit your signature to your town hall. We need this done in the next 10 days. So everyone go out there. We need another 7,000 signatures. So we need everyone to click. Tell all your friends in Massachusetts that you have someone who's one of you running for office who wants to win for you truth, freedom, and health. We need everyday working people, Gary, presenting us. People actually solve problems. So we need to get on the ballot. Both of the establishments are so afraid, Gary. So the way we fight back is to get me on the ballot. So everyone go there. Tell your friends who are in Massachusetts to go there right now. Fill that up, and we will mail them. We have our volunteers who will mail them a form so they can sign easily at the comfort of their own home, given this quarantine, and send it to their town halls. We make it really simple, but they just need to click there and fill out the form.
Absolutely wonderful. Dr. Shiva, thank you so much for joining me here on the Next News Network. Of course, we look forward to having you back for another update. And friends watching at home right now, hit the share link, leave your comments below, and let's make this viral. We'll see you at the next report for the Next News Network. I'm Gary Franchi.
You possess the power to impact the global narrative. Please share this report, and to get more videos like this, become a Next News subscriber by clicking the link below. Thank you for watching the Next News Network.
Thanks for watching the Next News Network. Tap here to subscribe to the channel to get the latest news and alerts. Tap here to watch our latest breaking news and our top stories. Tap here for our latest featured interviews. And make sure you tap here to get in on the new podcast, the G-Cast, with my wife Angie and I. We'll see you at the next report for the Next News Network.
Welcome to IMTV. I'm Alan Keyes, and this is Let's Talk America. Now today, I have a real treat for you. Very often, I don't mention names right at the beginning in this introduction, but our guest today is somebody you've probably heard about recently. His name is Shiva Ayyadurai. He is originally from India, but he has become a renowned scientist here. He has 4 degrees. Read them, 4 from MIT, right? Down the road from where I went to school. And he is somebody who has developed an understanding of our present crisis that I think is both unique and extremely relevant and important to the way in which we survive this current moment. So if you're ready to hear something that is both unusual and very, very important to the wisdom that we need to cope with our present situation, sit tight. We'll be right back. So great when you're a multitasking person. You can listen to them around the house, when you're out in the car, when you take a walk. Now we have put our shows on to podcasts. And you can listen to Let's Talk America on podcasts. You can find them at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor FM, and other apps. While you're there, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on our new episodes. Thanks for listening and supporting us. Together, we're changing the world.
Want more IMTV episodes? We are now streaming through Roku. Roku is a device that enables you to stream entertainment to your TV through your internet provider. The starting price is only $29, and you can purchase one either online or through your local electronics retailer. It's easy to use, and you won't have to worry about missing any more IMTV episodes. IMTV, changing the world.
Welcome back. Now, my guest today, you've probably heard about him. Rush Limbaugh mentioned him the other day. He's been interviewed by a whole host of different people on the internet, and now, finally, a little bit in what is called the mainstream, often acts as the mainstream media, but nonetheless, we're not going to hold his appearance there against him because the world needs to know about this man. And I'm going to let him mostly speak for himself, but I was extremely impressed. And not just by the credentials that we're dealing with or anything like it, but the way in which he talked about the crisis that we're facing, the real nature of that crisis, but also, and this is a connection, I'm sorry, a lot of people who are dealing with it as just a health crisis don't seem to get the point that we are actually facing what could end up being an existential threat to our way of life, shifting us from a government of, by, and for the people to a government of the powerful few. And doing it all, because you probably imagined that if that ever happened, there'd be a fight. But they have actually put us in a situation where if we're not careful, we could end up going into that not very gentle night without a fight. But I think that if we're willing to understand and pick up on the wisdom of someone like my guest today, we will probably have more than a fighting chance to hold on to our institutions and our national character, even as we make head, to get the knowledge and acquire the knowledge we need to really get a better sense of how we have a healthcare system that works for health rather than a sickness care system that works for moneymakers. And I think this is something he has on his mind, as you know, I have on mine. Welcome to the show, Doctor. It's a great, great pleasure to have you here. I want to ask you, as the first question, the question that you asked in a certain sense, or at least remind the audience of that question, because when I was looking at one of your presentations, you made the statement right out that it's not the coronavirus that's killing people. And you got to know that that's bound to take people aback a little bit. You know, why is he saying that? How can all these people be wrong? They tell us this is the virus doing it. But I thought by the time you got through your exposition, you had not only made a convincing case, you had actually helped to open up the minds of your audience to an entirely different way of thinking about the challenge that we are presently facing. So that's my first question to you. If it's not the coronavirus that's killing us, what is?
So, Alan, it's look, the central question here is we need to ask the right question, okay?
Right.
And the question here is, many times in science you say it's not the answer, but it's a question you ask. The question is, what does harm people, biologically that causes what we see, the manifestation we see, disease? In this case, with this virus, what people are seeing is the epithelia or the lungs being filled up with fluid, or people being taken to critical care with fluid buildup and attack essentially on the epithelial tissue in the cells, right? So that's what the manifestation is. When Ebola occurred, people saw arterial bleeding of the endothelial, right? So people are bleeding out internally. When polio occurred, people see the manifestation is people see attack on the myelin sheaths, right, in the spine. So what we tend to do in many ways, in a non-engineering based approach to medicine, we see this manifestation, and then we want to find the symptom, or in fact, somebody who caused that. We never, from a legal standpoint, we don't want to find the real criminal. We're trying to find some bystander that we could pin the problem on. Okay? So that's been the history of, frankly, the modern medical system for probably about 100 to 200 years, and it's gone through different cycles. So in the 1800s, when the germ theory came out, the concept was everything must be a microbe, everything must be a virus that causes disease, whether it was an infectious disease or a non-infectious disease. So this has gone on in medicine for a while. After Pasteur, there was another scientist, a German scientist by the name of Koch, Robert Koch, and Koch developed a hypothesis which said before you can pin a disease on a virus or a microbe, et cetera, it has to follow certain postulates. And we'll come back to that. And if it didn't, you can't do that. However, even in spite of Koch's postulates, science doesn't follow science because there are other interests. So, for example, when scurvy came, people thought it was a microbe, right? They said it was an unhygienic way in which the sailors lived. And for 100 years, we blamed hygiene when people were trying to find microbes. You can read the whole history of it. It turned out it was vitamin C. It was deficiency in vitamin C. Pellagra, this horrible disease where people would get essentially a very intense form of eczema, where people's hand would start peeling, right? People put that also as a microbe, and then said it was, the Italian immigrants coming in, we have to blame them. They're bringing some disease in. Well, it turned out that was a niacin deficiency. And you can go on. And then when the microbe theory fell apart, people had to get back into doing real science, but there was always this way that the establishment really liked microbes and infections or viruses because it's a quick way to consolidate power, to blame something very easily, what we call reductionism in medicine. And then also that served many political bases too, because the microbe theory always allows you to create fear, and you could use that fear to promote a quick solution or a quote unquote quick solution, which is typically a pharmaceutical drug or a vaccine. This has been sort of the ebb and flow of the medical establishment. In the 70s, late 60s and 70s, after polio went away, we had to deal with real diseases like cancer and heart disease. Well, even in those cases, after the consolidation of the NIH, people again went after the microbe theory, okay? And that involved trying to pin retroviruses on cancer. Viruses are the ones that cause cancer. And that was like huge funding went into cancer research. The virus guys are always looking for money. Yeah. All the money was going into cancer. So they said, well, let's point our guns over, let's say viruses are the cause of cancer. Now, they did find something, but it was like basically finding certain cases, which wasn't the general case. So I want to give you that backdrop because that backdrop has been motivated by vast amounts of money to move the discourse over to a virus or microbe, because that gives a very different solution, which can be controlled by big pharma. Well, when it comes to coronavirus, you can see the trajectory of this has been very, very well planned, starting about 40 years ago. If you look at, or even at 40 years ago, Jesus, it's getting old here, in the 1980s, when AIDS came out, okay? Remember, late 80s, early 90s?
Right.
And that's where Fauci really built his career. There was a guy called Robert Gallo who came up with this very, very false thesis, in fact, made up data, stole other people's virus information, viral data from the French, and he said HIV causes AIDS, if you remember this. And this was like the law. HIV must cause AIDS. All the Hollywood people got involved, and we had AIDS concerts, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Robert Gallo's work was brought up on scientific misconduct charges, and guess who came to his rescue? Fauci. So Gallo stepped into the back. Fauci then promoted the thesis that HIV caused AIDS. Now, in order to prove causation, you have to go back to Koch's hypothesis. By the way, Robert Koch won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for Koch's postulates, among other things, okay? None of it fulfilled Koch's postulates. Well, what are Koch's postulates? Koch's postulate says, before you can pin the crime on a virus or bacteria, number one, you have to find in abundance that virus in the host, which means the person has a disease. You have to find it in abundance, not like one or two, because all of us have one or two viruses of something. You have to find it in abundance. Second, you have to be able to extract it and culture it in a petri dish. Third, you have to be able to take that, inject it into a new host animal, and that host animal should reflect the same disease that was in the original. And then finally, you should be able to take it out of that host animal and show it was the same set of viruses. These are called Koch's postulates. Well, for when it comes to these viruses and bacteria, for some reason, this law gets thrown out the door. And I was at MIT, in 1993, when I was out in Hawaii taking a brief vacation, I met a friend of mine's mother, and she had AIDS. And she gave me a book, which was written at the time by a guy called Peter Duesberg. And Peter is an eminent scientist at Berkeley, who was one of the youngest people admitted into the National Academy of Sciences, one of the youngest to get tenure. And Peter basically was saying, look, HIV doesn't cause AIDS. In fact, Kary Mullis, who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, said it doesn't make sense. Well, those people were shunned away, and because Peter said none of it fulfills Koch's postulates. So Fauci saved Gallo, and the deal that was made was he would come out to the forefront. And if you look at the history of that, Fauci essentially became the guy who started promoting the HIV/AIDS causality when there was no evidence to show that. However, there's a lot of money in this, right? The AIDS industry got built up, right? And if you said anything against gay people, you were seen as politically incorrect. The reality was, if you look at that period, and everyone knows the 80s were a time of massive amounts of drugs. The gays in that time had one person had 1,500 partners. They were doing massive amounts of a drug called poppers, amyl nitrites. And now amyl nitrates, there's been 200 papers showing the direct causal link between amyl nitrites and what's called Kaposi sarcoma, which is what people would experience who had AIDS. And that's what gays would consume during that time to prolong orgasms. And they would abuse it, among other drugs. Well, that really destroyed the immune system. And if you look at the early 87 cases of AIDS, it was a destruction of the immune system, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, which is where you were destroying your T cells, which are in your adaptive immune system. I hope this is making sense. So this was the destruction of the immune system that was taking place, but they pinned it on a virus. Like, again, pinning it on someone who didn't commit the crime, which was HIV.
Now, what is the parallel on that logic between what we're facing now and what Dr. Fauci was doing at that time?
Same thing. So Fauci went through, that was his first rodeo. He created the hype that HIV causes AIDS. Massive amounts of resources went to it. Massive amount of fear. Hollywood people got involved in it. And you created an industry out of it. And now if you look at it today, number one, it was based on fear, fear, fear. People would get HIV and they thought, oh my God, it's my death sentence. 60% of Zambia has HIV positive. They're not dying. It's a common virus among many other viruses.
So what then is actually leading people to show signs of ill health?
Good question. Right. So we see in Western medicine, someone manifests something called disease. Now, in traditional systems of medicine, any disease, which I, by the way, in addition to having all the credentials with all the MIT sort of halo effect, right, which people value, which is great, but I also have had the opportunity to study traditional systems of medicine. In traditional systems of medicine, Alan, every disease went through 6 phases, or that was the etiology. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 were the early stages. Phase 5 and 6 were when it manifests itself full blown, which is what we typically deal with in Western medicine. And that's when we try to bombard it with some, bazookas and drop bombs on them or chemotherapy, et cetera. But when a disease manifests, it is typically, in the case of what you call quote unquote infectious diseases, it is some part of the body being attacked, right? Some tissue or some cellular structure. So as I mentioned, in the case of Ebola, it's the arterial endothelial cells get attacked, or the heart, or your vascular system. Well, in the case of this virus or viruses like by the way, coronavirus is a very common virus. It's a whole range of flu viruses. When that attacks, in the acute respiratory version of the pneumonia version of it, it goes and attacks your epithelial in your lungs. And then what that manifests itself as is either you get scarring of the lungs or you get edema in your lungs, which means fluid buildup. So the question is, why does this occur? Okay? So the typical narrative that people take advantage of people, and people like Fauci and frankly, the entire biopharma establishment, is to scaring the hell out of people, which, by the way, this has gone on for a long time. as I mentioned, is this virus is some monster, right? That it goes in it. This virus comes to you and it attacks you. And that's why, think about all the movies that are made. Oh my God, we're going to get this virus, right? It's this fear that the virus comes in and it's going to eat your eyes out, or it's going to paralyze you, or it's in the case of polio, right? Or it's going to eat away your heart, or it's going to eat away at your lungs, right? And then the vaccine is something that blocks it. That's the narrative that's put out there. Well, the reality is that's absolutely false. It's totally false. And in fact, many MDs, unfortunately, who don't get training in really understanding the immune system, if you ask a typical MD, says, "Oh yeah, the virus attacks you and the vaccine blocks it." By and large, that's the conclusion you'll get out of them. The reality that's going on is that the immune system is attacking it's attacking your own body. Okay, a dysfunctional and weakened immune system goes not even haywire; it overreacts because of its dysfunction. It's almost as though, think about, you're a boxer and you have two fists, right? Two arms, and I tie one of your arms back, right? Well, you're going to try to use the other arm and you may start flailing around, right? You may overreact with that use. So the example I was giving is, imagine another example. You have your home and you have your security alarm system so no one can enter. And maybe you have, I don't know, some electrical wiring. And then maybe you have your machine guns at home. Well, suppose the first two systems broke down, then you get so scared you start firing your machine gun everywhere. You may start hurting people, right? Because you are in a state of distress. That is what is going on. Your immune system, when it is in its homeostasis, wants to protect you. It has a beautiful modulating effect. And by the way, the immune system, the modern science of the immune system, which I shared in a distinguished talk I gave at the National Science Foundation back in November, also brought scientists up to date that the modern science of the immune system is so different than a very rudimentary science that we had back in the 1960s when the National Vaccine Program was implemented. Today, we know that the immune system involves your microbiome, this amazing gut bacteria. It involves the virome. It involves the innate system and the adaptive, and one of the systems called the interferon system, which is what my PhD work was on, which is a missing link, and your neural system. All these systems are interconnected. Again, the MD doesn't get any knowledge in this, but if you really look at it from an engineering systems perspective, which is why MIT created the Department of Biological Engineering, because they recognized medicine wasn't looking at the body as a system.
Well, that was one of the things that, as I was making myself familiar with the things that you have done, struck me. Because what you are describing in technical terms then requires that you take a more holistic view. You're not just looking at what's happening. You're looking at how things work together, comparing how they work together when things are happening well to what has gone wrong, and coming up with a conclusion that is going to be not just focused on the damage being done, but on the disruption of the system that may have caused it in the first place. Let me ask a question that will lead into, I think, what we can focus on as well in the second portion of this. Because it strikes me, as you were describing it, that the use of fear is twofold in our present situation. In one case, you are inducing a response of the body that then leads the body to react in such a way on account of the virus that it essentially accomplishes the job of its own destruction, releases forces that are destructive to the body. Isn't it true that if you look beyond for the moment just the coronavirus and what it has done and implied in terms of health and death, and there's some controversy about the magnitude of it at the moment and so forth and so on, but one thing that impresses me is the similarity between what's happening in our society at large and what happens to the body as you describe it in terms of the immune system kind of going into self-destruct mode. Because you look at the shutdown of the economy, you look at the effects of quarantine, the isolation of people, and so forth and so on. Both of those things also, I was looking at a headline the other day in Tennessee, more suicides had occurred in 1 week than people who had died from the coronavirus, and reminding us that the dislocation of people's lives can cause other kinds of problems. Are we now looking at a situation where there are forces in our society using these viruses as excuses to release our fear in a way that then gets us to destroy our institutions?
Alan, I think you're bringing up something really interesting here. The fundamental thing, in my view, that's taking place here is, in the letter that I wrote to the president, what I shared was, I said we need to resolve the immune health and the economic health, both. And the reason, if you look at the timing of that, when I did my first video, I received a call from someone very close to the administration, and they found my number and they called me, and they said, "Look, Dr. Shiva, we've seen your videos," and they said that Fauci has become very close to the president, and the thesis is that the economists will backfill in all the disaster that'll be caused by the health policy, which means the quarantining, shutting down the entire country. And this gentleman, very esteemed guy, he said, "Please keep doing your videos." So it was quite fascinating because I'm sitting in my room. I don't have, I'm not Botoxed. I don't have any lighting, It's very simple, humble instruments. And those videos were reaching people, Alan.
Yeah.
But the fundamental thesis was that we were not taking a systems approach to this problem. And that's what Fauci himself is doing. The problem itself is a health, quote unquote, a health problem and a economic issue.
Well, with that in mind, we're about a minute from our break. And when we get back, I would like you to complete the thought in a way about the present crisis. And then I want to get into something that was brought to mind by a diagram that you had used, showing the way in which the fear related to other effects overall in the system, so that people could then generate that fear as a way of essentially making power and profit for themselves at the expense of the system as a whole, which is to say the society and the people as a whole. And so a part of what we'll be talking about is whether we're in that situation or being pushed into that situation right now, as we also go on to discuss what might be the best way to make head against the actual focus of our fears at the moment, which is the coronavirus. You don't want to miss this, because this man is extraordinary, as you're experiencing, and what he has to say can result in a fundamental shift of your perspective. So just sit tight. We'll be right back after this message. I'm Alan Keyes. I just want to let you know that on a recurring basis every Tuesday, we're going to have a guest, Mike Adams, the Health Ranger. He's going to be joining us to talk about the whole array of challenges, both in terms of our health as a people and as individuals, and our health as a nation. We'll be looking at those things through the eyes of someone who has thought deeply about many things and who has many great ideas to share with me and with you and with everyone who tunes in to Let's Talk America on Tuesdays, when we meet with the Health Ranger to talk about how we sustain the health of our liberty. Welcome back. I am having an eye-opening and fascinating discussion with somebody who is getting the attention finally that he deserves, and I hope will be getting a lot more, because he's not only someone who represents a way of thinking, a way of understanding what's going on, for instance, in dealing with the coronavirus, and really understanding what is the nature of the source of the damage that it caused, but because he's taking a more, one would have at one time in our history used the word wholesome, because it means that which takes account of the good of the whole, right? And is doing what is compatible with it. So wholesome food is what is compatible with the good health of the body as a whole. We have forgotten almost and banished that word almost, as we are falling prey to ways of thinking that focus on problems and problem solving without looking at what's happening in the overall universe of relationships that are are the result sometimes of the way in which we go about trying to deal with those problems, which is ironic, but nonetheless has to be brought to mind. And that, it seems to me, Dr. Shiva, is what you're doing and helping us do in terms of the coronavirus. Question then, to sort of shape part of the discussion that I think we need to have in the next 20 minutes or so. And that is, as you're talking, I think the question that occurs in a lot of minds is, okay, in terms of what we're doing right now and what needs to be done in light of this coronavirus thing, what difference is made by the perspective that you introduced? In other words, how will it make a difference in the way we handle threats like this?
Well, first of all, when you so the goal, Alan, is to take what I call a systems approach to thinking. This has been sort of the long journey in my life for probably 50 years since I was a kid, where I had to really understand as a child, when I saw the caste system in India and its injustices, how a woman, my grandmother, could heal using a traditional system of Indian medicine, and then coming to the United States as a 7-year-old kid, working in a Western medical system where I started working as a research fellow when I was 14, creating the first email system. Mm-hmm. So systems were always around me. And the reason systems were important and are important in this conversation is when you have complex problems, when you have problems that involve multiple disciplines, when you have problems that involve many, many different kinds of attributes. I had to grow up in India, in Bombay, which is a wild city, in a deep South Indian village. Two different worlds. Imagine growing up in New York and also growing up in Mississippi, right? In the deep South. You had to learn how to live in these worlds. And then coming over to the United States in 1970, which was a world of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the Vietnam War is going on, America. So I had to figure out how to integrate things, not assimilate. It's a different world. Integrate. I think the word integration to me is a little more interesting word, because you have to still understand the principles of nature and bring them together to find a solution.
Well, I also think that's an interesting distinction, because integrate, it seems to me, implies respect for the wholeness of the individual that you're talking about. So that you're not asking somebody to change into something else. You're asking them to be themselves and fit that into the interactions they have with everybody around them in a way that allows the whole to operate with everybody working together for good.
Right. So one of the centers I started was, a research center called the International Center for Integrative Systems. And if you look at the logo on it, it's this weaving of many, many different yarns that come together. And when you do that right, you actually create great strength and resilience in systems. This is just sort of fundamentals. So for example, composite materials were one of the biggest breakthroughs that occurred in mechanics and applied mechanics. When we learned how to blend different kinds of materials together, we created new materials that were stronger than materials on their own, like steel, for example. Mm-hmm. So composites are stronger than steel. They're lighter. You can do more things with them. But that came through integration.
Well, so one of the things that strikes me about the way they're dealing with viruses and other things is that it seems always to lead to this rifle shot approach.
Rifle shot, reductionist approach.
Right. And you're shooting at it like the system disappears and you're focused. That's a good, somebody who's doing sharpshooting is going to focus on the target and the world disappears. But in a way, your approach focuses on the world so that you can understand why the danger has appeared in the first place and deal with it in a way that prepares the whole not to respond in a self-aggressive way and with aggression against itself. And I think it's one of the things that really called my attention. But before we get further into that, I want to let folks know. Joining me in the studio here is my good friend and the inspiration for IMTV, really, Bob Sisson. And Bob, what I'm about to say, I think, has to do a lot with the things that brought us together. Because that sense that you need to start looking at the way in which people are or are not any longer focusing on the whole impact of what they're doing, raises to my mind something you brought up, Dr. Shiva, and that is the fact that the approach that's taken is not necessarily motivated by making everybody healthy. It actually seems to be, at least in part, maybe in gross part, motivated by what is going to make money for some people. Is that in fact true? Are we looking at a system that is now not looking at the whole because it's focused on one motivation that isn't necessarily about health?
Yeah, I mean, what we're looking at is we're looking at a system of medicine, and if you go back to the history of it, Western medicine, there's a paper I wrote on this, people can find it online, really came from wartime medicine, Alan, if you go look at it. In the 1800s, if you go look at the Crimean War, and really the mother of Western medicine was Florence Nightingale. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a member of the Royal Society of Statistics. She saw that soldiers were dying on the field, not dying on the field, but after they came into the hospitals because of the horrible wound care system, et cetera, the hygiene, the filth. She's the one who created the modern healthcare system. It's a longer story we can talk about. But the origin of Western medicine goes back to putting a soldier back on the field. This is something that needs to be understood. Crisis care, reductionism. And look, reductionism has its value. Soldier gets hit in the chest, you got to fix his lungs and put him back right, or there's infection taking place in his arms, you have to cut it, right? It's about crisis, do this, get this back up and going. So that's where the history of Western medicine comes from. And that history still lives with us today. So we wait for crises. We're not here to prevention. The motivation is a crisis. So philosophically it comes from wartime medicine to put a soldier back on the field. So that's why medical interventions, surgery, antibiotics, steroids, these are the chemotherapy. The analogy we use is we got to destroy the agent, right? Destroy the disease. It's wartime metaphors. So, and that plays into the entire fundamental economic model of Western medicine, which is basically, it's not about curing disease. It's not about preventing disease. It's a model that enjoys disease, profits from disease, and lives off disease, right?
Now, if you let me interrupt you 1 second. The reason I introduced Bob into the equation, Bob, I think that part of what brought us together was a common recognition between us of the need to take that insight that Dr. Shiva is expressing. And you have actually been working with MMS, but also overall with a mentality that focuses on how you improve the health of the whole body in a way that then has the side effect of strengthening the body's ability to stave off or even deal with, remove from itself, these kinds of things. I mean, am I right? And is Dr. Shiva kind of talking about something that aligns with what you've been aiming at?
Well, of course he is talking about that. And Dr. Shiva, it's just a thrill to be here with you today. I look forward to maybe talking with you some more. I'm known as Bob the Plumber, and I noticed on a couple of your shows you were talking about ordinary folks and you kept mentioning plumbers. So thank you for shouting out for plumbers. But no, in Uganda, we've been using this MMS thing that we're telling you about to purify the body, and so that the body's immune system can do its job that God created it to do. And so that was my point in contacting you and trying to get you on the show, is to hopefully introduce you to some of the work that chlorine dioxide does. And of course, Mike Adams has done some work with that too, and I'm gonna put you guys together. But anyway, it's a thrill to be here with you. And if you will continue your thoughts now, we love hearing your brilliance and your ability to put thoughts together that move the human spirit. So continue, please.
Yeah, so what I wanted to, let me just bring this up. So what I wanted to share with you guys is that if you actually look at the foundations of Western medicine, it fundamentally came from war, right? And it has great use there. God forbid something happened to you. You got in an accident, knock on wood, it doesn't happen to anyone. You're in an awful situation and you let a disease progress to a state where it became crisis. Western medicine is valuable for that. Okay, surgery, God forbid you needed some serious pain medicines, right? I mean, there are some very powerful things in the herbal world too, but by and large, Western medicine has optimized itself for that. That's what it's good for. But it knows, frankly, zero about prevention. It wasn't designed for that, right? A soldier you're sending a soldier into war. You just hope that he doesn't get hit. And if he does get hit, you have medics out there, right? It wasn't based on prevention. So what we have is a medical care system that should be focused on prevention, and we don't do that. And so because we don't do that, what we have is we have an approach which has built up, literally past probably after World War II, to the entire scientific establishment, which is also based on a crisis management model. So it does not want to focus on simple solutions because they don't yield it profit. Okay? So for example, so in this crisis, isn't it incredible that the head of the so-called infectious diseases group, right, Anthony Fauci, or for that matter, Francis Collins, the director of the NIH, not one of them has said, hey, let's start giving our the really crisis people, whether it's from coronavirus or whatever started it, high dose vitamin C, IV vitamin C. Right. Now, this is something that isn't even something that's up for debate. It's been used many, many times. Even the pro-pharma big establishment journals, like even the Journal of the American Medical Association, had to admit, at minimum, it lowers the amount of stay in the ICU. So the fact that vitamin C, IV high dosage vitamin C, which has 4 very, very important effects, it's an antioxidant. So when you have fluid building up in your lungs, you have the cytokine storm taking place because you have a dysfunction. Going back to the heart of this, you have a dysfunctional immune system. Your immune system is attacking itself, and part of attacking itself, it starts eating away at your own tissues, and your body starts having edema and filling up with fluid. Now, so what we're doing is buying all these ventilators, and telling people and sending high pressure air down there. Well, that's just going to blow up your alveoli and shred it. It's simple physics. Instead of addressing that, we need to get rid of the water, right? Basic plumbing, Bob, right?
Amen.
You don't just put more pressure down there. You try to figure out what's causing the problem and you get rid of it. Well, vitamin C is one of the most powerful ways to reduce those reactive oxygen species, number one. Number two, it's also an anti-inflammatory. It puts to rest, it modulates, it's an immune modulator through a series of pathways which I've shared, which affects brings down the inflammation. It manages the immunomodulation, and moreover, it's also an antiviral. It stops the virus replication. It stops RNA replication. It stops the assembly of the virus inside your cell and the transports. It's hitting it in 3 different ways. So think about this. The entire medical community, very few doctors, who unfortunately do not learn any nutrition. They're basically big pharma-based education. They're victims of this system. Not one person on the national level, except me, through this medium, has been promoting that we should give those critical patients high-dose IV vitamin C, at least even to save them. Because right now, 80 to 90% of them, it's a death sentence once they go on those ventilators, number one. Number two, when you take a systems approach, you realize 2 very profound things. That there's another vitamin called D, which is, stimulated by the sun. And that vitamin, particularly D3 cholecalciferol, is an antimicrobial, which, by the way, vitamin D it's a hormone. It has amazing effects on many, many aspects of your body. But more importantly, when it comes to viruses like this, it's an antimicrobial. That's why, and by the way, this too, a number of integrated medical doctors understand, 80,000 papers, if you go to PubMed, written research on vitamin D. This too is not something that's foreign. However, the big pharma model does not want to talk about vitamin D because vitamin D is in opposition to vaccines, right? Well, in vitamin, which can lead to victory for many of these people, doesn't go into the vaccines or the ventilators.
Let me ask a question exactly along those lines, because you're describing things that when they go into the body perform a function that essentially strengthens the body's ability to fight. Right. Isn't one of the first things, though, that happened as kind of a revolution, even in warfare, when they discovered that just keeping the place clean was really important?
Well, that's one of the things Florence Nightingale figured out. Florence Nightingale.
Because I have often wondered why it is that in dealing with something like this, they wouldn't be asking whether it's vitamins, other minerals, things like that play a role in helping the body to simply flush out things that don't belong. and that will get into tissues. It seems to me that some of these things act like human beings used to act in the early days of the human race. They were in an environment surrounded with all kinds of things that were going to attack them. In this case, it would be our immune system. So they go to hide in caves. They try to insert themselves into the cells and into the tissue so that the body won't recognize them as the enemy. And one of the things that you need to do is flush them out of their hiding place. And so that the body will see them, but also so that they can be exposed perhaps to things that will break them down and flush them out of the body. Why isn't this kind of an approach, looking for things that will help in this way? Why does it seems not to figure in the thinking of these folks at all? Why not?
Well, Alan, it goes back to this fundamental issue that we've seen this march of science and innovation and technology, which at one point in American history was at the edges. What I mean by that is that there were lots of innovators in this country. This country was built on innovation. The founders of this country were children of the Enlightenment, be it Washington, right, Jefferson, Franklin. They actually had skills. I mean, they knew sine and cosine and tangent and trigonometry and how to build stuff, etc. And more importantly, there was a time when innovation and science took place at the edges. People would be tinkering. It was hobbyists. And that consolidation of that sort of dysfunctional way that science is done today was removing the power from the edges, from the individual innovator, from the individual scientist who would go get private funding. They would figure out how to do it. It was more entrepreneurial. Became consolidated, particularly after World War II, after the Manhattan Project, after Sputnik, and culminated with the passage of the Mansfield Amendment in 1970, where we created the scientific establishment. We created, tons of PhDs who would essentially become minions in this factory of the scientific establishment, not to do innovative research. You see, that was sort of rather to regress to the mean, to go to the mediocrity. And so peer-reviewed journals were created. You had science bodies being created. In medicine, you had the boards being created who essentially handcuffed a lot of doctors. So you created golden handcuffs. So you created the concepts of, tenure in academia, where in order to get tenure, you had to publish papers. And in order to get tenure, not only did you have to publish papers, but you had to have your peers cite your work, which meant that you were creating regression to the mean, okay? Which means everyone had to agree that this work was good, and people who had new ideas were kept out of that. So
what's ironic about that, Doctor, is that isn't that the same structure that allotropic medicine and all vaccines and all, they face the same structure that was rejecting the innovations that they represented. And now they've recreated that structure in order to cut off in the 21st century the innovations that could produce a more wholesome and holistic and comprehensive and also effective way of dealing with the ailments that are attacking us. Now, it seems to me you focused your attention on this a lot, and one of the things that's needed is something you've already come up with. You call it, I think, cytosolve. Yeah. What is that about?
So, so one of my journeys, when I was in India, I saw my grandmother would mix these very interesting, powerful herbs that she would go have either me or my uncles go get in the forest. And then when she observed someone, she would diagnose them, but she would mix them together. And by mixing them together, she created a synergistic effect. And by the way, those medicines were different for different people, even though they may have the same ailment, which means the right medicine for the right person at the right time. So that really inspired me to see if I, could do that at some point. So in 2003, it took almost, 30 years later, when I came back to MIT to do my PhD after doing several degrees in engineering from MIT, there was a new field that was developing called systems biology. And it came at the end of the Genome Project because we realized that we have the same number of genes as a worm, and there was something wrong with biology. And what that led to was saying, wait a minute, genes can be turned on or off, and it's the molecular reactions that matter, not just the genes, all the stuff that goes outside of the nucleus, Alan, and inside, right? It's not just the nucleus, command and control. It moved to a much more holistic model, and the goal was, one of the challenges that the National Science Foundation put forward was, could you mathematically model the whole human cell? Imagine if we could understand every molecular reaction in the human cell and you could model it, you could eliminate the need for animal testing. And more importantly, you could use the computer to figure out, my grandmother had her own computer, right, her own system. But from the Western standpoint, you could figure out predictively and quantitatively, oh, if I took this much of this and this much of this, what would it do at the cellular level? Now, this was seen as an intractable problem, a grand challenge. That's what I did for my PhD between 2003 and 2007.
The great problem is that right now we are coming up against our time limit in this second. You know, it's remarkable when you're talking to somebody as bright as you are, as full of ideas and accomplishments as you. The time just flies by, and you are raising so many things. What you are talking about there, for instance, sounds to me like it would allow for a decent marriage between what had been the understanding of medicine for thousands of years, and it must have been reasonably successful because the human race is still here, right? And the fact that it's been dogmatically rejected by a lot of people. The mindset is, if you don't go through these and these ways of doing it, then you can't come to a valid conclusion. It sounds to me like what you have there would be something that would allow us to test whether or not the conclusion is valid and to actually foresee the way it's going to interact with the body. That's revolutionary, and it's just what's needed right now, so that instead of waiting for these people to come up with another thing that's going to burden the world with cost and fill their coffers up at the expense of waiting for a lot of people to die, plus side effects that come about that they don't bother to think through, we could be using things that are already in front of us and learning how they work better so that we can use them more effectively. Am I right?
And for the individual. You see, the goal is the right medicine for the right person at the right time. So Cytosolve is the technology to do that. Now, in addition to that, at some point we should talk about a whole series of a new educational paradigm I built called systems health.
Right. Well, wait, you got to stop. The only thing this convinces me of, looking at my clock, is that you have to let us continue this discussion in some way as soon as possible, because we haven't gotten to the other thing I think is powerfully important. You are running for the United States Senate now in Massachusetts.
I'm running for the Senate.
I have to tell you, I think that what could we use right now in the Senate of the United States, the legislature, in the councils of government, more than somebody with the common sense, but also with the scientific know-how and the intelligence to apply it that you have. I don't know. It seems to me, Bob, that those folks in Massachusetts could do the nation a big favor.
Amen.
If they will get to know Dr. Shiva and really come to understand that, you know, the Bible talks about someone coming into this situation for such a time as this. And I really believe that Dr. Shiva, this time was made for you.
Amen.
And I hope we can very soon continue to bring my audience the understanding that you have, because we just were able to scratch the surface. The implications of what we've talked about are so enormous that I'd like another chance to take a bite at that very powerful fruit and see whether we can get some more benefit out of it. In the meanwhile, I want to thank you for the work you're doing, for joining us here on the show, and say, as I always do to my audience out there, you know, this show is a chance to hear things you need to ponder. Big things sometimes, as we were talking about them today, that can make a real difference. So ponder them. This is not just for poking, it's for thinking. Think about them. And then join us again here at Let's Talk America.